On the damp ground, a girl lay exhausted from the battle, her clothes torn during the battle. Her eyes were full of fright. Without moving, she only watched the battle unfold. The weak are killed, but the strong win. This is the truth of the world. The huge mouth full of powerful teeth opened wide and let out a ferocious and threatening roar. The sound echoed throughout the dungeon and testified to the unfolding battle, instilling terror and fear. The atmosphere was getting darker. After that, fresh blood begins to spread in splashes in all directions. The powerful blow delivered to the monster's torso was decisive for the monster. The injury received by the Minotaur is incompatible with life. This is the story of the struggle for the title of king. The mortally wounded Minotaur was spurting blood. His entire body was covered with deep wounds and blood splashed out from his mouth with death cries. As he continued to hold his axe, his eyes gradually lost their luster. The completely exhausted monster fell onto the rocky surface of the cave. The monster's huge body made a loud sound as it fell. When the Minotaur expired, his body began to gradually dissolve into thin air and left behind a sword and coins. The two adventurers began to examine the sword. One of the men picked up a weapon, the length of the blade of which was almost human height. The partner added that it's not so easy to find a Minotaur with grace, even among 50 such monsters. The conversation between the two adventurers was interrupted by a girl. She was very embarrassed and blushed. The girl tried to cover her body with the remaining pieces of the suit's fabric. She urged the guys to quickly end their idle chatter and return outside. Then one of the guys turned to his partner and said that this time they had a good opportunity to walk all the way to the 25th floor. Unexpectedly for the adventurer, a staff flies into his face. Blushing, the girl shouted at him not to look at her. The three comrades continued on their way, moving away from the battlefield. They were chatting casually. The swordsman asked the girl why she was not doing a good job. She was only outraged, and their friend only indulged in the words of a friend. The empty cave had only empty stone walls and earth, and in the middle of the entire space there was a spring with clear water. A few hours later, breaking the silence, some unexplored clot began to make its way out of the ground, growing larger. The demons of the labyrinth are not born from their mother's womb. They come out of the walls and floors like a fountain. The waves spreading across the water surface of the spring seemed to announce the approaching appearance of a new Minotaur. Sometime after one monster dies, a new monster of the same type appears on the same floor. New monsters do not inherit the experience or memories of their predecessors. They are born as adults and have no gender. They do not mate and have no children. Their development takes place inside the cocoon, which ensures the vital activity of the Minotaur. They look like living beings, but they are not. Therefore, the magical demons of the labyrinth do not evolve, inherit, or even grow. This time, a huge Minotaur broke out of the cocoon. The monster's hands were holding two large axes. The atmosphere in the cave abruptly became more oppressive. Having broken free, the monster did not take long to wait. The Minotaur's eyes flew open. The pupils shone brightly in his eyes, which were as black as the night sky. The monster's gaze was quite brutal and angry, so that even the veins could be easily seen. Thus, in the Sazardon Labyrinth, which is located in the kingdom of Valdemost, another labyrinth demon appeared that day. This monster is on level 10 in the boss room. Veins bulged all over the Minotaur's bulging body. All the muscles of the monster were toned. The Minotaur was in a state of tension. The pupil of his eye shone with rage, searching for a victim. Smoke came out of his half-open mouth due to internal aggression. The Minotaur couldn't stop gasping for air. His condition was like thirst. Suddenly, he turned his attention to the spring that was behind him. He abruptly turned around and quickly walked towards him. With a sudden movement of his body, he knelt down and began to drink water greedily. His thirst was so intense. When he plunged headfirst into the spring, the drops scattered in all directions from the force with which he hit the water surface. After drinking water from the spring, the Minotaur directed his gaze skyward and spread his arms out to the sides. He was kneeling in this position, and his jaw was clenched very tightly. He was so angry that veins stood out all over his body. The monster abruptly became hysterical. He let out a deafening scream, and his hands involuntarily made a sharp movement. The blow he made with his axes was so strong that it shattered the stone surface around him. The ground around the Minotaur was completely destroyed. Pieces of stones, into which the earth crumbled, covered the entire surface next to the spring. The force from the axes was so great that smoke and dust were coming out from under them. The Minotaur was furious. His face and body swelled to enormous proportions. His gaze turned fierce. There were veins all over his body, even on the bull's head, and his teeth were clenched with hatred, and steam was coming out of his nostrils. Suddenly, the monster felt someone's presence behind him. His attention shifted abruptly. He turned his head to see the visitor of his cave. There was a small female shadow behind the Minotaur. The Minotaur was clearly ready for battle. His gaze focused on the girl. In front of him was an adventurer with 2 pigtails and an armor partially located in her upper body. She pulled her sword out of its scabbard with a flick of her hand. Her determination was evident. In front of the girl, however, was a huge Minotaur, who was still kneeling by the spring. Looking at her opponent, the adventurer immediately realized that this was the boss of the 10th floor, and his name is the Minotaur. The girl is an adventurer with the serial number A0655. Her name is Ellen. Her training level is 16, and the class she currently holds is Dexteen, and the class she currently holds is D. Her personal information has been displayed on her amulet. Suddenly, an incredibly loud sound of hoofbeats could be heard throughout the cave. The Minotaur finally got to his feet. The whole atmosphere was pressing down on the girl, who was shocked. A drop of sweat slid down her face from excitement. A huge Minotaur was already standing in front of little Elin. He exerted tremendous pressure on the girl. His whole appearance suggested that he was full of rage and hatred. He was clutching his axes tightly in his hands. Such a rival made Ellen worried. Taking a breath in and out, Ellen decided to calm down. She remembered that she had made good preparations for this battle. She received advice from a veteran who has a lot of experience in battles. Moreover, she has prepared equipment and medicines. Looking at the healthy Minotaur, the girl remembered that if she could defeat him alone, she would be transferred to Class C, and if she goes to Class C, then she will be able to earn more money. Ellen is going to become an adventurer who can earn more money. She has a great desire to take care of buying out her father's farm. After all, then her family will be able to get back on their feet. Besides, her mother will start smiling again. Steeling herself, she pushed aside her excitement. She touched her armor, which has God's protection on the back. The rune on her armor says that it is worth praying diligently, and from the depths of your heart to be heard. After preparing for battle, Elin raised her eyes and directed her resolute and brave gaze at her opponent. She asked for the blessing of the deity of the earth, named Bora. The Minotaur was roaring furiously at this time. He was just beside himself with rage, which was eating away at him from the inside out. Without waiting long, the monster ran away and swung his axe at the girl who was standing in a fighting position. Ellen swung her blade and abruptly rushed towards the Minotaur. With a scream, she charged. The girl swung her sword and struck the monster in the wrist, thereby injuring him. However, without thinking for a long time, the Minotaur swung at the girl with the same hand. Ellen managed to dodge, so the axe hit her headdress, which was cut into small pieces. Taking advantage of the moment after the blow, the girl decided to make a retaliatory sword throw. Using an open stance to strike, Ellen aimed her punch at the Minotaur's wrist again. The blow inflicted on the arm caused severe pain in the monster, which even screamed. Out of rage, he tried to hit the adventurer with his other hand, who skillfully dodged his blows. Using the same trick again, Ellen struck the Minotaur's wrist with her sword, but with her other hand. In pain, the monster froze in place and began to scream throughout the cave. After calming down, he directed his aggressive gaze at Ellen and, without stopping for a second, rushed towards her, wanting to attack her with his horns. Realizing the motive of the Minotaur's actions, the girl reacted quickly and jumped into the air, thereby dodging the opponent's blow. The monster stuck its horns into a rocky hillock and broke it into small pieces. Ellen knows that Minotaurs are strong but slow enough and move primitively. They're just swinging their axes or rushing at you with their horns. In this case, you just need to follow his actions, and then chop off the hands. After all, if the Minotaur can't use an axe with both hands, then it can be considered a victory. Summoning all her remaining strength, Ellen slashed at her opponent with all her might and severed the Minotaur's arm. The monster started screaming from the wound. Looking at the Minotaur, Ellen rejoiced at her victory. Unexpectedly for the girl, the Minotaur struck with the hand that the adventurer had just wounded. He slapped the girl in the face with his hand. The force of Bala's blow was so great that Ellen flew against the cave wall, and the monster's hand was bleeding. After recovering from the collision and impact, the girl noticed that the Minotaur was preparing to launch an attack. Standing confidently, he began to take in air. Noticing this, Ellen was horrified. She remembered being told that if the Minotaur starts to take a big breath, it prepares for a special attack, a crazy roar. If you get hit, all the energy will drain out of the person, and after a while, you can't move. One shot is enough to turn the tide of the battle, so Ellen began to look for an antidote in her reserves. Touching the vials that contained all the medicines, she realized that they had all been smashed when they collided with the wall. The medicines and antidotes she had hidden under her equipment were all destroyed. All the liquid spread over the girl's clothes. She realized with horror that she no longer had the ability to remove the effect of the skill. At this time, the Minotaur, having gathered enough air to attack, finished his preparations and let out an incredibly loud and deafening scream at the same time. All the power of the sound wave was directed towards the girl. Seeing the Minotaur launch his crazy roar attack, the fear of being killed and defeated became more and more clearly visible in her eyes. Having no escape routes, she took the entire blow and was paralyzed by its effect. The Minotaur, however, immediately ran away and hit Ellen with all his might with his horns, who was unable to respond. Having dragged the girl for some distance, the monster swung, and he threw an adventurer into the air. After flying some distance, the girl landed on the ground. The blow was too much for her, and she lay exhausted on the rocks. Her body was covered in wounds, and one leg was broken. Before she could move away from the attacks inflicted on her, she heard the sound of hooves approaching her. The Minotaur, full of rage, nostrils flaring in anger, was closing the distance with Ellen. He radiated an incredible and colossal pressure, desperately looking at the dungeon gate. The girl realized that she did not have a chance, so she decided to retreat. She decided to leave the room, because the boss can't leave his own room. Gathering all her strength into a fist, despite her broken leg, she rushed towards the gate. She was running desperately. At this time, the Minotaur, not wanting to miss the opponent, rushed after the girl. Approaching the exit, the girl did not notice how a monster had already appeared behind her, who with all his might struck the girl with an axe, which hit her leg. Thus, Ellen lost one of her legs. The girl, unable to keep her balance, fell to the ground and couldn't hold back a scream caused by the pain of losing her leg. As she remained in place, she realized that she would soon be overtaken by the Minotaur walking behind her. Terrified that she might die, she looked at the exit from the cave as her last hope. At the time when the Minotaur swung an axe to strike, the final blow to the opponent, she jumped up and jumped towards the gate. Ellen managed to rush through the exit before the Minotaur's axe reached her. The monster's blow landed on the magic gate, which did not allow it to pass further. It really pissed him off. Standing in front of the cave's exit, he continued to stare at it and try to pass through the barrier. However, as soon as he crossed the border, his body would ignite, causing him incredible pain. Therefore, she continued to stay inside the cave. The fact that he couldn't cross the barrier stressed the Minotaur out a lot. His thirst for victory over his opponent did not leave him, and he became more and more eager to continue and finish what he had started. His eyes lit up more and more with rage. Seeing the adventurer who had managed to escape from him lying at arm's length in front of him, his blood boiled in his veins, and his face twisted more and more with anger. His nostrils flared, releasing a large amount of smoke. Ellen was sitting in the corridor of the dungeon. She tried to stop the bleeding and bandage the open wound with improvised means. Her vulnerable condition brought her a lot of pain. After bandaging her leg, she still couldn't catch her breath after experiencing fear of the enemy and death. She was leaning against the wall, sitting and greedily inhaling the air. Her bangs covered her face, but even so, you could see the tears streaming down her eyes. Ellen was very disappointed. She drooped after the setback because she had placed big bets on this fight. Tears were streaming from her eyes. The exhausted face took on a soft expression. Abruptly, she grabbed onto the armor with her left hand. She kept saying that she couldn't give up now. Therefore, taking hold of the place where the rune was, she began to pray to the goddess of the earth, Bora, to give her another chance. Because she needed this victory, she persistently continued to ask the goddess for strength. The rune located on her armor after some time, as if responding to the girl, begins to glow, thereby giving her an answer that her request has been heard. However, before she knew it, Ellen noticed how the barrier of the gate from the cave began to sparkle and shoot lightning. The girl watched in horror what was happening. Suddenly, she notices an offended hand emerging from the barrier. Following the hand, a Minotaur came out of the gate, burning all over. His whole body was on fire, which caused him incredible pain. However, he did not stop advancing to the barrier. He was determined and furious to endure the pain. Gradually, his entire body was able to pass through the barrier that separated his cave from the rest of the dungeon. Both his arms and legs were covered with severe burns from lightning strikes that tried to stop him. Ellen was completely terrified. After passing completely through the gate, the Minotaur rushed towards the girl, who could not even move. The sound of hooves became more and more distinct. Ellen, unable to stand up and fight, couldn't believe that the boss was able to come out. She had never encountered a boss leaving his room before. This just can't be happening. Moreover, such dungeon demons shouldn't exist. After the Minotaur broke through the barrier, he could not stand on his feet from his wounds. But despite this, and the fact that he continued to burn, he was able to reach out to the girl and grab her by the throat. Steam was coming from his entire body. He was covered in burns and blisters. But even so, one could see his determination. His jaw wouldn't stop clenching. Even though his eyes couldn't open, it was clear that he was clearly angry. After Ellen was grabbed by the Minotaur, her eyes suddenly filled with tears. She was completely demoralized. With a loud cry, the monster gathered all his available strength and, continuing to hold the girl, swung his arm. And with the next action, he defeated the adventurer. Having collided with the floor, the girl's body could not withstand such a blow. Thus, Ellen was inflicted with a wound incompatible with life. The blood from under the huge palm of the Minotaur scattered in all directions. However, after a short period of time, all the remains and blood of the girl began to disappear into thin air. All that was left of her was her gear. The exhausted Minotaur continued to lie on the floor of the dungeon corridor. His body continued to burn and steam was coming from him. Gradually, his entire body seemed to be falling apart into small pieces and crumbling. However, at one point, the monster forcefully and aggressively squeezed the girl's remaining equipment. His face continued to burn, but the anger in his eyes spoke for itself. Gradually, his arms and horns began to crumble. Different parts of the body continued to split off from each other and collapse. Such a pitiful state greatly enraged the Minotaur. Out of rage, he lost his teeth, as before, and the next moment, she got down on her knees and started screaming at the top of her voice. His entire body continued to collapse. From the hopelessness of his situation, he continued to vent all the pain and aggression through a loud roar. It was the thirst that had been bubbling inside him since the moment he woke up. A thirst that wouldn't go away even when he wet his throat or killed his attacker. The thirst was as intense as hatred or rage. Or maybe it's hunger. In his desperate situation, the only thing the Minotaur begged for was strength. He asked to be given even stronger enemies, and even more strength that would allow him to deal with all opponents. After he uttered his request for power, his hand, which continued to hold Aelin's armor, finally crumbled into pieces. The remains of the Minotaur's body lay exactly on the rune that grants God's power. After the Minotaur uttered his wish, suddenly the rune replied to him that she had heard his wish, and therefore, she is ready to fulfill his dream. In the next moment, a dome of light appears around the monster, covering its body. Then this radiance helped to create new body parts in place of the collapsed ones. His body began to take on a new look. Instead of the burnt skin, a new whole one appeared. This radiance is given only to people who have made a vow to God and received his blessing. The so-called blessing. And the proof of this lies in the amulet that Ellen lost during the battle. The blessing comes from the accumulation of experience gained as a result of winning a battle. It heals the wounds of the subject's body and mind. It makes a person stronger. Simply put, it's a level up. Thus, an updated level 10 boss appeared in the corridors of the dungeon, which acquired a new look and increased its level. His whole body seemed to glow during the transformation, illuminating the entire corridor. The Minotaur has changed and acquired new external features. His body also resembled a human's, but was covered with hair in certain places. Even so, his bull's head and hooves were preserved. His horns became bigger and more powerful. The hands and claws became stronger. Feeling a surge of strength, inhaling and exhaling, the Minotaur clenched his fist tightly. There was only one thought in his mind, that he wanted more power. More battles, more enemies. Even stronger. On the 10th level of the Sazardon dungeon, one labyrinth demon was born that day. But this monster is a unique individual that can evolve. Despite the fact that the demons of the labyrinths do not evolve, grow, or inherit experience. Later, with fear and respect, he would be called the King of the Maze. He is the most unpredictable, uncontrollable. This is a completely unique monster. Labyrinths are mysterious spaces that exist all over the world. It is no exaggeration to say that, thanks to them, humanity has become what it is now, prosperous and prosperous. Once an adventurer noticed that in the labyrinths, where there is great wealth, great fame, unquestioning power, and the grace of the gods, you can get everything you want. Having gained new strength and raised his level, the Minotaur continued on his way. That's how he came across other monsters, which he defeated with his axes without any problems, having a great advantage over others due to his strength. Meeting more and more enemies, he continued his search for more and more powerful enemies and new battles. Every time he defeated his rivals, he felt the same thirst that did not go away. And he continued to feel rage and hatred. Humanity was still unaware of the incident that had occurred on the 10th level of the Sazardon dungeon. There was no news yet that a stronger demon had appeared and was able to gain new abilities. The Minotaur is a monster born from the depths of the earth. His nature is ferocious and uncontrollable. With his existence, he poses a threat not only to humanity, but also to the demons in the labyrinth. After defeating another monster, the Minotaur ruthlessly tore off a piece of flesh from the opponent. The monster wanted to satisfy its thirst by eating the meat of the demons it had damaged. He brought a piece of flesh to his mouth, which he opened wide. Before he could put the piece of meat in his mouth, it abruptly disappeared, leaving only a glowing trail. After the monster's entire carcass had dissolved, the only thing left behind to remind him of his existence were medicines and coins. When a person or monster dies in the maze, its remains disappear without a trace, leaving behind only objects and money. Thus, the Minotaur was left without food. He could only watch in surprise. After his stomach started rumbling, the monster felt a strong hunger that would not let him rest. Out of anger at his situation, he stamped his foot and let out a loud and strong roar that reverberated through the entire corridor. This state of affairs bothered the Minotaur, and he could not calm down. All this only contributed to the fact that his rage and hatred became more and more intense, which infuriated the monster. He was plagued by questions about what kind of situation this was, why he was unable to enjoy the meat after winning. He was unhappy that after defeating his opponent, he couldn't get his loot. While the Minotaur was completely lost in his thoughts, a pack of wolves with sharp claws approached him. When he noticed that he was surrounded by wolves who clearly disliked the monster, the Minotaur was overcome by a feeling of anger. Without saying a word, he turned to face the pack and stood in a fighting pose, ready to attack his enemy. The wolves rushed towards the Minotaur in a crowd. They started baring their fangs. Noticing the approach of the enemies, the Minotaur swung his axe and struck the stone floor of the corridor. However, the wolves reacted quickly and jumped aside, surrounding the monster from different sides. Avoiding the blow, one wolf rushed and inflicted a wound on the monster's leg. The other, bypassing the opponent's back, sank its fangs into the Minotaur's back. The bites of the monsters brought intense pain. The other members of the pack, without taking long to wait, also rushed into battle. The wolves' strategy was that they used all the space they pushed off the walls of the corridor, striking the Minotaur from different angles. Not having time to follow the trajectory of all the wolves, the Minotaur only defended himself from the monster's fangs so that they would not fall into vital places, and the wolves continued to advance, biting the monster in different parts of the body, causing him pain. After another attack, when the Minotaur's neck was open to attack, one of the pack jumped in the hope of grabbing the opponent's throat with its fangs. After spotting a place, it opened its mouth and was ready to strike. Suddenly, blood began to drip rapidly onto the floor of the dungeon corridor. The wolf's face twisted. At the moment of the jump, a Minotaur attacked him, preventing him from biting his neck. Thus, the upper part of the wolf's jaw ended up in the monster's mouth. Then the Minotaur tightly gripped the tail of the wolf, moaning in pain. With a sharp movement of his hand, the Minotaur, continuing to clench the wolf's jaw with his teeth, separated the monster's head from the rest of the body. Blood was flying all over the corridor, and the wolf's head fell to the floor. The incident shocked the others. The non-stop attack on the Minotaur from the pack abruptly stopped. Continuing to hold the wolf's carcass, the monster suddenly turned his attention to it. And unexpectedly for everyone, he greedily bit off a piece of meat from the monster. As soon as he started tearing the flesh from the body, the head and body began to disappear, leaving the object and coins. Once again, the Minotaur was left without prey, which only made him more furious. Gripping his axe, he was ready to fight the wolves that surrounded him, who bared their fangs. A pack of wolves were aggressively set up against a level 10 boss. Their faces were contorted with anger, and their teeth were tightly clenched. And after that, the monsters rushed at the Minotaur together. After the battle, medicines and coins were left at the place of the dead monsters, suppressed by the Minotaur's hooves. After defeating his rivals, the demon headed down the corridor. After the fight with the wolves, the Minotaur's entire body was covered with abrasions and open wounds that were bleeding. They haunted the demon. It was obvious that the Minotaur was beside himself with rage after the incident. He thought back to how he had let a pack of wolves injure him. Moving on, baring his teeth, he walked and was angry that some small fish were able to cause damage by taking their numbers. It only encouraged the Minotaur to desire power. As he wandered through the corridors, he heard the sounds of battle. They caught his attention and stopped the whole stream of thoughts in his head. Then, quietly approaching the battlefield, he cautiously stood around the corner. Then I saw a scene in which a guy, with his back against the wall, was fighting with two wolves waiting for the moment to attack. From the residual light, it was clear that the adventurer had already defeated one of the monsters. It was the first time the Minotaur had seen another human fight. Therefore, holding his breath, he continued to quietly and calmly observe with interest how the whole subsequent course of the battle was developing. Abruptly, the wolves simultaneously rushed at the guy from two sides. The adventurer blocked one with a shield, and the other, who wanted to strike with his claws, he tried to wound with a sword. However, then the monster still managed to hit his arm and leg. The Minotaur continued to watch the entire course of the battle with gusto, noticing the slightest tricks and methods of fighting. Meanwhile, the guy continued to resist the endless barrage of attacks from the wolves. Suddenly, the adventurer's shield flew off. Then one of the wolves rushed over and grabbed his wrist with its fangs. The bite made the guy scream at the top of his voice. However, he did not lose his head and pierced the monster with the sword in his other hand. While his left arm was bleeding, the guy was still standing in defense against the last remaining wolf. A huge mark from the monster's mouth was left on the adventurer's hand. Despite this, he pointed his blade at the monster and watched it. The next moment, the wolf rushed with its mouth open at the boy, who in response powerfully swung his cold weapon, trying to hit his opponent, who reacted quickly and jumped into the air. There was a situation in which the guy became open to further blows from the wolf, who deftly dodged the sword blow. Having seen the whole situation, the Minotaur was clearly at a loss, not knowing what further actions to take. Suddenly, the guy reached for his little dagger, hidden just in case. Pulling it out of its case, the adventurer dealt a decisive blow to the eye of the monster, which was clearly not ready for such an attack. From such a blow, the wolf was thrown aside. With a sound, he hit the floor of the hallway. His eye was badly damaged and bleeding. He was severely wounded, which made him unable to see and continue further combat. Immediately after the blow, the guy ran up to the lying wolf and dealt him a fatal blow, which became victorious. Further, a medicine appeared at the place of the monster's death, as well as coins. The guy quickly grabbed the medicine with a sigh. He was clearly exhausted from the whole fight. In addition, he had a lot of injuries sustained during the battle with the wolves. Therefore, he immediately opened the vial and poured the entire contents into his mouth. Potions are the most useful thing an adventurer can pick from a monster. After the guy drank the potion, the effect was not long in coming. The guy's injured hand began to smoke and heal instantly at the bite site. Potions differ not only in color, but also in their effects. Red potions restore stamina and heal wounds. The effect is so strong that it restores even lost body parts. Therefore, the guy's hand felt like it was brand new. Tired after fighting monsters, the guy sat down on the floor. All the wounds on his body gradually began to heal, emitting smoke. Relaxing after the victory, he sighed. But suddenly something caught his attention. Unexpectedly, he noticed that the Minotaur, the boss of the 10th level of the second dungeon, was standing next to him around the corner. The Minotaur just stood there and stared at the guy. However, upon noticing the boss, the guy was horrified. The guy was shocked by what he saw. He couldn't believe that a Minotaur was standing in front of him. A big mystery to him was his presence in the hallway, which is located outside the boss's room. Noticing that the guy had seen him, the Minotaur gripped the axe tightly in his hand. He came out of the corner and stood in front of the guy on the other side of the hallway. The guy watched and did not understand how he could defeat such a monster alone with his level. Realizing his opponent's superiority, the guy looked back. Prepared to escape, he walked around the corner with lightning speed and smoothly. Left alone in the hallway, the Minotaur followed the guy. However, when he went around the corner, he did not find the adventurer there. There was only a staircase leading to the exit from this level in front of him. The Minotaur, in turn, stared intently and attentively at the passage that led somewhere up. Suddenly, all the wounds on the monster's body started bleeding again. This brought great pain to the Minotaur, which he was unable to remove in any way. He just bent over. The boy disappeared, and the Minotaur's attention was attracted by something else. However, covered from head to toe with wounds, he wanted to rest more than anything. Therefore, turning around, he left the place and headed for his cave. He took one last look at the stairs. A few days later, Mycenae was seething with life in the vicinity of the Sazardon dungeon. There were various shops on the streets where various adventurers shopped. Some are in armor, others in magician's clothes. Among these streets, filled with merchants and people who wanted to buy something for themselves, there was a signboard that attracted the attention of all comers to the Adventurers Guild. Inside the guild building, the entire space was packed with people who were dressed in various outfits. They were all sitting at tables and having conversations with each other. There were also other magicians and knights roaming the corridors. Some guys were standing at the reception desk and looking at some documents. At the same time, someone was drinking with a group of friends celebrating their victory. In short, everyone was having fun and enjoying life. Also, a considerable number of guys were standing in front of a high board filled with various job advertisements for adventurers. There was one young man among the crowd who was just looking for a job. However, everything seemed too easy to him. This adventurer's name is Pasha, and his identification number is 01843333. The guy's level is considered 28. His class is assigned to C. The guy looks pretty exotic. His facial features are quite sharp, and he has very thick and blonde hair on his head. While the guy was looking for a job, someone called his name from the top floor. After that, Pasha noticed their guildmaster, who showed him a piece of paper with a personal assignment. The guildmaster said that this assignment is aimed at investigating Godzu. He said that he continues to receive reports of adventurers encountering the Minotaur in the corridors of the 10th floor. After listening to the guildmaster, Pasha just grinned, because everyone knows that the boss can't leave his room. He said they must have imagined it out of fear. Then the guildmaster said that a token in armor belonging to a D-rank adventurer, Alina, had been found in front of the boss's room. There were huge Minotaur claw marks on the armor. Besides, there are rumors that coins and potions are scattered everywhere on the 10th floor. They say someone is constantly killing wolves there, but they don't pick up the dropped items. After listening to the casemate, Pasha thought about the whole situation. It seemed strange enough to him that someone incredibly strong appeared near the boss's room. Besides, it's amazing that after slaughtering the wolves, he didn't take the items with him. Then Pasha summed it up by saying that he only needed to check if the Minotaur was in the soy room, if anything unusual was happening on the floor, and make a report about it. The guildmaster said it couldn't be easier for him. The guildmaster apologized to the guy for giving him something so vague. He asked Pasha if he could do the job and do him a favor. Pasha abruptly beamed at the fact that he would be doing a favor to the guildmaster himself. Besides, the reward for the task is worthwhile. While the guys were discussing the upcoming assignment, they did not notice how someone was interested in the details of the case. One girl, a magician with a big hat and a tall, big knight in armor behind the girl, were walking rapidly towards the guild master and the pasha. They were obviously happy to witness the conversation between the boss and the guy. An adventurer girl with an identification number 0189787. Her name is Charlie. She has been assigned level 28, and she also belongs to Class C. The girl has long hair, big eyes. She has a big hat on her head, which is worn by magicians. The knight, named Raystrand, is level 29, and class is C. His identification number is 018421. The guy is quite tall and has a strong build. He wears his hair short. He is fully equipped with armor. He always accompanies Charlie. Pasha began to resent that Charlie and Raystrand wanted to join, because if he split the award into 3, it would become worthless. Then Charlie said they wouldn't take the award. They are just happy if the guildmaster remains in their debt. Raystrand then asked the guildmaster if he was against such an offer. The man gave his consent if Pasha agrees. Moreover, Charlie and Raystrand have almost reached the B rank, so the man doesn't have to worry. Then Charlie proudly assumed a statuesque pose and said that she, the graceful sage Charlie, would surpass the great wizard Gil Rinks. So she did not see the slightest reason to refuse the service. Watching everything that was happening, Pasha made a face and stuck out his tongue, telling Charlie to stop showing off. He started mocking the girl's nickname and saying that she was just a narcissistic girl. Not wanting to listen to Pasha, the girl, without waiting for the guy to finish, she tapped the threatening ones with her staff on her hand. Seeing this, Pasha abruptly quieted down and fell silent. He was scared enough. The girl's face changed dramatically, and a very intimidating expression appeared on her face. Despite her smile, her whole face and body said that she was unhappy with the words she said. He menacingly asked the guy what he had just said. The frightened Pasha could not find anything better than to say that he had not said anything against her. The atmosphere was so oppressive on the guy that he was already covered in sweat, and a funny expression appeared on his face. Hearing what she wanted, the girl turned around as if nothing had happened and said that they were on their way. As she walked forward, she left behind the guildmaster, Raystrand, and Pasha. While the girl was not looking, Pasha quietly whispered to the knight how he manages to cope with the character of Charlie. In response to this question, Raystrand just smiled and said that when you get used to it, the girl can show cute. Suddenly, Charlie stopped and looked at the guildmaster. She asked them what to do if something unpleasant really happened on the 10th level, even though the chance was extremely small. She clarified her question about what they should do if they discovered that for some unknown reason the Minotaur was roaming the corridors. In response, the guildmaster only said that they should act on the situation. The decision will be left to them. At this time, in the cave, the monster is sleeping peacefully next to the spring. Moreover, the man added that if something happens, he will also give them the reward they deserve. The guys joined forces, happy and enthusiastic. Their gazes were full of determination and positivity. After all, if anything happens, they will be given an additional reward for the murder, which they do not doubt. Thus, the bloodthirsty monster had pursuers who wanted to fight him. Resting in his cave, the Minotaur is unaware of the impending danger. Now the Minotaur and the boys cannot escape a fierce battle. A few hours later, the team, which included Raystrand, Charlie, and Pasha, crossed the gates of the maze of Sazardon, leading to the 10th floor. The guys found themselves in front of the entrance of the boss room of this level. The guys boldly passed through the barrier. The adventurer Raystrand is a warrior. Adventurer Charlie is a sorceress. Adventurer Pasha is a scout. Entering the boss's room, the guys found the Minotaur, which they need to conquer. The hunters were greeted by a huge and modified Minotaur, who also noticed the newly arrived adventurers. The guys examined the monster and happily summed up that, as expected, the boss could not leave his room. However, they noticed that the Minotaur's appearance had changed. He got bigger. Such changes seemed strange to hunters. Looking at the Minotaur, each of them noticed that he had rather menacing and frightening eyes. They were surprised that such a low-level monster, which could be hunted alone, could feel a threat. Charlie looked at the Minotaur warily. She warned the guys about her bad feeling and warned them to be on their guard. The girl was extremely worried about the monster's fearsome gaze. Raystrand Looking at the Minotaur, assumed that this monster was somehow unusual. He happily added that a higher reward was due for him. In addition, he suggested that the chance of falling out of grace is also high. Then Pasha intervened in the conversation and said that they would share the dropped items, but the reward for the murder remained with him. Charlie didn't care, so she agreed, telling him to pay only for all the supplies. Then Raystrand added that if any sword falls out, he will get it. Pasha, grinning, asked if his companions were really confident in the drop, because he needed 50 Minotaurs in the account. Then a pleased Raystrand said that he already had one. Stunned by this news, Pasha asked if what the knight had just told him was true. Then the guy clarified that he had 49 in his account. Charlie called out sharply to the guys, telling them to stop talking. She was serious about it. Something was bothering her. Besides, she advised everyone to be on their guard. She gave the order to start fighting. The whole team took out all their equipment and got into combat positions. Raystrand took his place in the vanguard, drawing his huge sword. Charlie stood at the back to provide support with magic. And Pasha was also standing behind the guy with his bow. As soon as the guys started, Charlie ordered Pasha to shoot a Karis when she and Ray would distract the Minotaur. She said she would use a spell to try to immobilize the monster. Suddenly, Pasha asked if his expensive arrows were included in her supplies. The guy was clearly unhappy with this arrangement. The girl told him to shut up and asked how else he wanted to end the battle. Pasha began to think about what to do. Of course, he wanted to end the battle as soon as possible, but the expression on the Minotaur's face made him very nervous. Something was bothering the guy because he, like everyone else, understood that something was wrong with the monster. The Minotaur, like the guys, was belligerent. His gaze, as always, was quite menacing and cold. There was an atmosphere of danger around him that made everyone worried. Then Pasha reached out with his right hand. Out of nowhere, a glowing magical rune appeared in the air after the command inventory. This turn of events shocked the Minotaur. He had never seen anything like it before. Inventory is one of the abilities possessed by those who have followed the path of an adventurer. It was with this ability that Pasha was able to get the thing he needed without any problems. In fact, the inventory is an invisible storage, thanks to which a strong carved arrow appeared in the hands of the guy. Charlie began to recite a spell directed to the goddess, from whom she asked for the power to control the stone ropes with which she envelops her enemies, depriving them of the ability to move freely. The girl finished reading the spell completely and hit the ground with her staff. Hitting the ground, she uttered earthbound bonds. The ground beneath the staff began to shine brightly. Immediately, the Minotaur's leg was wrapped in stone ropes, preventing it from moving. Immediately, Raystrand ran towards the monster and aimed to stab it. When he swung his sword, the Minotaur did not pay any attention to him, as he stared in surprise at his leg, which was immobilized in a way he did not understand. Getting close to his opponent, Raystrand delivered a fairly strong blow to the Minotaur in the lower back. The force with which the knight struck was so great that even the Minotaur writhed in pain, and his eyes turned white. However, after receiving a powerful blow on the back, the Minotaur's body was not even scratched. Then Raystrand realized for sure that the monster in front of him was different from the usual ones. Such an attack caused a great storm of emotions in the Minotaur. Ray engaged in close combat. The Minotaur and Raystrand attacked each other not only with powerful blows, but also with incredibly great speed. It was extremely difficult to follow their movements. Bright sparks resembling an explosion emanated from the collisions of their weapons. Charlie, who was supported, was doing magic. She called for water to turn into a blade that would cut and shred. A large piece of ice with an incredibly sharp tip formed in front of the girl. After finishing the summoning, she sent the ice blade towards the enemy. The boulder flew at the Minotaur with great speed. The Minotaur was also very surprised by this. However, he managed to block this blow with his axe. However, Charlie, without waiting for a long time, continued to summon the ice blade non-stop. The girl was focused on the spell. Her whole body was tense, noticing that not one blade was attacking him as before, but several at once in one volley. The Minotaur's eyes widened in surprise and fear. While Pasha was heading to the position, he noticed that, despite the fact that the wizard class is suitable for continuous use of spells, a fairly large amount of magic is leaving. He thought her nickname suited her. Continuously, a huge number of incredibly sharpened ice blades flew towards the Minotaur. Despite the fact that this Minotaur is a rather unusual individual, The head will be its weak point anyway. While Reincarnation was fighting in close combat with the Minotaurs, and Charlie was providing support with magic, Pasha ran into the enemy's rear to unexpectedly shoot him in the head. That's what the team relied on to defeat the enemy. The arrows of Icarus, which Pasha possesses, are created in temples. These arrows have a strong poisoning effect that is difficult to ignore. It was such an arrow that Pasha pulled out of his inventory and inserted it into his bow. Pulling the bowstring, Pasha aimed his Icarus arrow at the enemy. After the guy released the bowstring, the arrows flew swiftly in the direction of the Minotaur's head. Pasha was excited at the thought that they were able to shoot in the blind spot. Looking at how Icarus's arrow was rapidly flying towards the Minotaur, the guys were sure that this would ensure their victory in this battle. But suddenly, with a sharp movement of his hand, the monster cut the arrow with an axe, which shocked Pasha. Having beaten off the attack from the blind spot, the Minotaur opened up to the blows of the ice blades. When they reached the monster, they stabbed into the torso, causing pain. The Minotaur then raged and pushed Reincarnation away with all his might. Pasha was stunned by what he saw. He couldn't believe that the Minotaur had deflected an arrow flying for a blind spot, ignoring the ice blades. At this time, Charlie was shouting that he had missed a great opportunity to attack. Looking at the opponent, who was boiling with rage and anger bubbling inside him, Pasha could not understand whether it was a conscious choice or not. If his confirmation is correct, then the situation seems to be getting hot and dangerous. Having come to his senses and banished obsessive thoughts, Pasha decided that everything that had just happened was a pure accident. However, the Minotaur's patience had already expired, and his thirst for battle could not be overlooked by his flared nostrils and steam. The Minotaur was serious about fighting further. He took up a fighting stance, preparing for the incoming attacks. The gaze was aimed at his enemies. The eyes were determined to turn the tide and win. Watching the Minotaur's actions, Reincarnation noticed that he had prepared himself. Charlie just casually said that it didn't matter. The boys asked if Pasha still had any arrows. However, the guy replied that it was empty. After learning the whole scenario, Charlie said that they needed a new strategy. She suggested attacking from 3 sides and depriving the opponent of weapons. She asked Ray to be serious. She herself was determined to keep her promise to her father. Thus, their team surrounded the Minotaur from 3 sides and prepared for the next attack. The monster was also ready to deflect the blows of the enemies. A heavy atmosphere hung over the battlefield, which is typical of death battles. Earlier in the temple, in front of the statue of the goddess and the portrait of the hero, Charlie's father gave her the sacred staff that his teacher Gil Rinks had given him earlier. And he ordered Defender Reincarnation to keep an eye on his daughter and control her. Standing in front of her father, Charlie made him a promise that, despite her inexperience, she would become a wizard suitable for this staff and surpass the great wizard. Full of confidence, young Charlie swore an oath to her own father that she would achieve her goals by the next time they met. Continuing the battle with the Minotaur, Charlie continued to invoke the power of water, forming ice blades. Pasha did not stop shooting arrows at the enemy, and Reincarnation, as before, inflicted a flurry of sword blows on the Minotaur. The team of guys persistently continued to attack the enemy over and over again, who simultaneously repelled all the attacks of the guys. All the hunters were exhausted from fighting against the Minotaur. While Reincarnation took the brunt of the Minotaur's melee attack, Charlie conjured ice blades and aimed them at the Minotaur's vulnerable spot. However, when the ice blades almost reached the monster, he deflected them all with his axe. Charlie was taken aback. She couldn't believe that a Minotaur demon of his level was able to consciously block those blows that flew to the death points. The adventurers are starting to lose their patience. Minotaurs are not the most powerful bosses. However, even so, these demons, who possess only brute strength and great endurance, pose no threat to the C-Class team. However, this time it's different. All their attacks did not cause much damage. The Minotaur continued to reflect their attacks into the central area of the body. When restrained by roots and bleeding from numerous wounds, the Minotaur's movements were not hindered. On the other hand, adventurers took red recovery potions, strength recovery potions, stamina recovery potions, mana recovery potions, but had difficulty maintaining their strength. However, their supplies are limited. No matter how many potions they took, they couldn't regain their concentration, and their mental fatigue continued to increase. Unable to withstand such pressure, Charlie hit the ground with her staff and began to cast a spell. She called out to the power of light and fire, which would devour all who stood in his way. She continued to cast the spell. She turned to the 9 original sins, the 5 great regrets, the anger of the red bronze, the blue dull sadness with the desire to burn her enemies so that he turned into a coal. When the boys noticed that Charlie had started casting a fireball spell, they began to dissuade her, because she was defenseless while she was casting the spell. Unable to withstand the pressure, despite the pleas of her friends, Charlie continued her work. She knew what she was doing. She said that a man who would become the greatest wizard in the world shouldn't have a problem with such a small fish. Raystrand tried to reason with the girl and begged her to stop. While Ray was distracted, the Minotaur pushed him away with its horns. He swung his axe towards the girl and threw the weapon. Like a whirlwind, the axe began to fly at Charlie, who had not finished casting the spell yet. The girl turned out to be completely open and defenseless before the advancing threat. Pasha shouted sharply out of excitement and fear for Charlie. Suddenly, Charlie's face was completely covered with bloodstains. Her eyes were filled with terror. Numb with fear and frozen in place, Charlie couldn't say a word. Raystrand stood in front of the sorceress, shielding her from the blow. Ray got into a fighting position and held his sword in front of him like a shield. The next moment, Charlie noticed that the helmet protecting the knight had collapsed and fallen off his head. Without losing his composure, Raystrand calmly reminded Charlie with a smile on his face that the most important thing for a magician is calmness, as her father used to say. Raystrand, with a split head, continued to calm the girl and advised her to take a deep breath. Despite the fact that the wound was deep and serious, the guy did not stop looking at Charlie sweetly. Looking at Raystrand, Charlie's eyes filled with tears. She was very worried about her friend and was very upset that he had suffered because of her rash act. Leaning against the guy's back, she apologized to him. But suddenly and abruptly they were interrupted by the cry of Pasha. Standing up and looking at the Minotaur, the guys noticed that their opponent was preparing to make a special crazy roar attack. He greedily inhaled the air, trying to immobilize the team. Pasha warns Charlie and Ray that the Minotaur was preparing to use a frenzied roar. She reminded them to drink potions that would neutralize the attack. When the guys managed to take the potion, the monster attacked them with all its might, with its roar. A strong sound wave spread throughout the cave, hitting all those who could not withstand his attack. The guys at that moment were not able to put up anything against their opponent. After the guys took the shockwave, they were exhausted. However, the effect of the potion instantly eliminated the paralysis without taking long to wait. The actions taken in advance were able to help them avoid the worst. Slowly, getting up from the ground, the guys came to their senses after the crazy roar of the Minotaur. Suddenly, Pasha pulled out another Icarus arrow from the inventory. The guy decided to go all in. After using a frenzied roar, there is time until the next one is rolled back. Although there is not much time, however, you can try to meet the deadline and deal a fatal and decisive blow to the demon. Pasha decided to end the fight as soon as possible. Unfortunately, however, immediately after the special attack, without a break for recovery, the Minotaur began preparing for the next crazy roar attack again. He began to take in a full chest of air again. Everyone was shocked. Not being ready, the guys were hit by a frenzied roar, completely unprotected and unprepared. They were pushed away by the wave. Before the team could take a potion that nullified the attack, they were doomed to paralysis. Pasha, like the guys, fell to the floor from impotence. All the energy from his body was gone. He could not stand up and, deprived of any strength for a while, produce at least some kind of blow. Vash did not understand how the Minotaur used the roar twice without any interruption. At this moment, the Minotaur manages to escape from the embrace of the stone ropes. Having become free in his movements, he immediately headed towards Pasha. The adventurers couldn't have expected this. Watching the monster's actions, Charlie was scared that he was going to attack her friend. She was in silent terror. Lying on the floor, she couldn't move or help Pasha in any way. What was happening seemed impossible to the guys. The maze level remained the same, but the boss's level has increased. And now this evolved demon was moving towards the dangerous Pasha, the owner of the arrow of Icarus. Pasha continued to lie there and watch with horror in his eyes as death approached him. He was completely confused and scared. He couldn't do anything about it. In addition, he began to realize that their opponent had new abilities. This shocked the adventurers. A maze monster that doesn't evolve, doesn't grow, this couldn't happen. However, the Minotaur has the ability to learn. He gained experience and knowledge from all the battles. When the demon reached Pasha, he severed the guy's head from the rest of his body with a single movement of his hand. Blood gushed out in all directions, turning everything red. And the Minotaur was still angry. The anger that poured out on the guy did not go away. After giving up his life, Pasha disappeared into thin air and left behind only a bright ball of light and an Indian headdress, the feathers of which scattered in different directions. Watching her friend leave this world, Charlie fell into a stupor and despair. She could barely pronounce the guy's name. Her face expressed genuine horror and fear. Raystrand pulled himself together and, overcoming himself, got to his feet. He told the girl to follow his example and get up faster. His whole body was shaking. It was incredibly difficult for him to get in and hold his body after losing energy. Wounded and exhausted, Raystrand clenched his teeth in pain and said that he would do something about it. So Charlie must not give up and continue to resist. However, the girl still couldn't move and get to her feet. She didn't know what to do next because even if they could move, the effect of the roar still hadn't worn off. Raystrand only gripped the hilt of his sword tightly. He reassured Charlie and reminded her that he had promised to protect her, but not because her father had asked him to, but because the guy was doing it all on his own. So she shouldn't worry. Gathering his strength, Reinstrand raised his sword, preparing to confront the approaching monster. Standing in front of Charlie, he confidently said that as long as he stood by her, he would never lose. Closing the distance, the Minotaur swung his axe. He aggressively attacked the knight. Raystrand noticed that his opponent had only one axe left. If he does everything right, the Minotaur will be disarmed. Therefore, they have a chance. Noticing the axe rushing at him, he lunged with his feet to avoid the sword strike. Bending down, the guy slipped under the blade. He was going to hit the revealed central part of the demon's body. What surprised Raystrand was the Minotaur's fist flying at him. Using his observations, the monster used a track that he had previously seen. He distracted the enemy with an axe, planning to make a surprise attack. Raystrand's eyes widened. He's amazed that the Minotaur has calculated his move and prepared an attack. The guy's eyes showed fear and horror from the approaching powerful blow. Before he knew it, the knight received a hard blow to the face. The fist slammed into the opponent's head with incredible force and anger, not giving him a chance to dodge or minimize the consequences. After making an attack, the demon completely blocked the enemy's actions. Unprepared for this outcome, the guy fell back with a bruised face. Blood gushed from the wounds like a fountain. The Minotaur used a trick that he had seen in the adventurer's fight with the wolves. Taking advantage of the enemy's condition, the monster chopped off his arm. Thus, he deprived Raystrand of the opportunity to continue the fight. The pain of losing his hand brought incredible torment to the guy. He couldn't hold back his screams. Looking at the Minotaur, Raystrand began to realize that this was no ordinary demon. He's not even special. This Minotaur is abnormal. His killing intent, power, stamina, and abilities made him a terrifying opponent. Charlie still couldn't move. He only shouted Raystrand's name, fearing for his life. And in the next moment, her face darkened. She couldn't say a single word. She froze in horror. Raystrand shouted to his girlfriend to escape from the dungeon urgently, because she must definitely survive. However, while he was giving guidance to the girl, he did not notice how the Minotaur behind him had already decided his fate with his weapon. Then the bloodthirsty and furious Minotaur ended the life of a glorious adventurer named Raystrand with his axe. The impact sent blood flying in all directions. The strength and accuracy of the attack were so high that the guy didn't even have a chance. At that moment, Charlie's face turned red again because of Raystrand's blood, but this time, for the last time. The pain of losing a loved one, shock, and fear were baked into his eyes. All the emotions were mixed up, and the girl's face took on a strange expression. All that her friend left behind were the broken armor that fell to the floor and the remaining soft ball of light. Grief overcame the girl. She couldn't make a single sound. She just continued to stare at everything with her mouth open. She remembered how they used to sit together peacefully and calmly. That day, Raystrand had sworn to her that he would protect Charlie at all costs. The guy believed in the girl and was wholeheartedly rooting for Charlie to become a great magician. Saddened by the loss of a loved one, Charlie found the strength to stand up. The Minotaur continued to stare at her. From the pain that filled the girl's chest, she began to scream. Tears streamed from her eyes. Grabbing the sacred staff, she began to recite the summoning spell that she hadn't been able to complete last time. With all her hatred, she called out to the forces to defeat the demon and avenge the death of her friends. Magical lightning began to appear around Charlie. She channeled all her anger and hatred into one spell, Fireball, which was supposed to avenge Ray's death. Charlie continued to chant the spell, even as the axe, which had overcome the magical fire above the staff, was getting closer to her by the second. At the time of completion, he was only a few centimeters away from the girl. The next moment, the Minotaur was jubilant. With his roar, he seemed to inform everyone about his victory over the hunter team. The boy's clothes and objects were scattered all over the cave. The sun was already disappearing below the horizon, taking the light with it. The surroundings of the Sazardon dungeon of Mycenae City were gradually plunged into darkness. At this time, in the Adventurers Guild's main office, the guildmaster was standing and watching the sun. All he could think about was that it had already been half a day since the departure of Pasha, Charlie, and Reincarnation. He was worried that too much time had passed. This is not typical for ordinary intelligence. He wondered if there was something in the dungeon. Suddenly, an unknown figure called out to the guildmaster from behind. The man asked the guildmaster named Logan what was bothering him. Logan turned around and apologized to the guest for being confused all day. Putting a cup of tea on a saucer, the man said that the role of the guild leader was making itself felt. Logan constantly performs duties or solves some problems. Then the guest asked his friend to tell him about his worries in case he might be useful. The old man sitting in Logan's office turned out to be the King of the Winds, a great wizard who defeated the strongest monsters, Gil Rinks. Life continued to flow in the guild. The adventurers, as before, continued to gather at the tables, receive assignments, and talk. At this time, in the main office of the guild, the great wizard Gil Rinks learned from his friend Guildmaster Logan that the adventurers who had gone to investigate had not returned. So slowly and peacefully the two friends sat and had a conversation in the main office of the Mycenae Adventurer Guild. The men looked at each other in silence for a while. After a while, Gil Rinks, closing his eyes and holding his chin, thought about it and noticed the Minotaur once more. The old man, dressed in his gear, continued to sit on the couch next to his helmet. The great wizard proudly bore the name of Gil Rinks. His adventurer identification number was 003868. His level is estimated at 97. He's in Class S. The age of the hero is pretty decent. His entire hair has already acquired a silvery hue. After listening to his friend's worries about his charges, the old man decided to check out what had happened to his children. Upon hearing this suggestion, Logan immediately started saying that he couldn't bother his friend. However, before Gil Rinks could stop him, the guildmaster continued to stand just as calmly, leaning on the table. He only looked at how his friend was suddenly transported to the dungeon. Sighing in helplessness, Guildmaster Logan only continued to hope that everything was all right, and his charges were safe now. Left alone, he continued to wait for his friend's arrival. Gradually, outside the window, the sun continued to disappear below the horizon. While the guildmaster was minding his own business, Wind King Gil Rinks suddenly arrived from the dungeon with the news by a teleporter. Guildmaster Logan turned around and calmly asked his friend about the situation in the dungeon. Gil Rinks slowly took off his helmet and remained silent for a while. He then placed 3 adventurer medallions and Charlie's broken sacred staff on the table. The wizard said that he found the equipment and medallions of 3 people in the boss room on the 10th floor. The Minotaur himself was not there. While Logan continued to look at the guy's things with horror and misunderstanding, Gil Rinks asked him if Charlie was a relative of Isel. That's how the great wizard found out that the girl was the daughter of his friend. There was a deathly silence in the main office of the Adventurers Guild. Guildmaster Logan couldn't find any explanation for how a C-class group that could reach the 30th floor of a dungeon could die at the boss of the 10th. After waiting for a while, Gil Rinks got up and informed Johann that he had to report everything to the palace. He asked the guildmaster to postpone their conversation until the situation was clarified. A serious-minded Gilranks made it clear to the guildmaster that this issue needed to be dealt with properly. The Great Wizard was clearly worried about the whole situation, as indicated by the frown on his face. Thus, after his friend's departure, the guildmaster was once again left completely alone in his office. Only the candle continued to burn on the table, illuminating the room. Looking at the medallions, Logan wondered how 3 people could have died at once. In addition, the Minotaur continued to wander through the corridors of the maze. He did not stop scouring in search of new strong rivals. The Minotaur, who had become stronger after defeating 3 adventurers, wondered what the future held for him. The Minotaur continued to roam the corridors of the 10th floor in search of new rivals. Thus, he reached the stairs that led to the 9th floor of the dungeon. The monster decided to cross the gate that had previously attracted his attention. The next morning, Guildmaster Logan was informed of the Minotaur's reappearance. This news shocked the man. He was completely at a loss as to how the Minotaur, the boss of the 10th floor, ended up on the 9th floor. The boss of the 10th floor appeared on the 9th floor. A group of 5 people who had become adventurers just this year claimed that the Minotaur had just left without attacking them. All 5 of them, as one, told the same story. The story was just incredible. In the main office of the Adventurers Guild, the Guildmaster drooped and was puzzled by the events taking place. Sitting on the couch, Guildmaster Logan ordered an employee to alert all adventurers about the Minotaur's appearance on the 9th floor. Logan wondered what the problem was. The floors in the dungeon are connected by special stairs. Only adventurers can use them, but demonic beasts can't see them. Back then, the only question in my head was how. Getting more and more annoyed, the Guildmaster began to scratch his head nervously. He suggested that demons become adventurers. This has never happened before, and no one has ever encountered such a thing. Not knowing what the reason for all the events was, the Guildmaster asked the guy standing quietly at the door of the office for his opinion on the events taking place. Bowing his head, the manager, named Iador, replied that he had no suggestions at the moment. He also added that this had never happened before, so he couldn't say for sure if it was caused by outside interference. The Guildmaster noticed that, indeed, interference could take place. There is a possibility that someone has used a powerful spell. However, Logan had no idea which one it was. Iador noticed that such a scenario was quite possible. The manager immediately added that, whatever the circumstances, the situation could be resolved in the near future. The Guildmaster became sharply interested in how he proposed to solve the problems that had arisen. Manager Iador reminded Guildmaster Logan that at the moment, there is a person living in the walls of the dungeon who is able to cope with the Minotaur wandering through the corridors of not only the 10th floor, but also the 9th floor. The Sazardon dungeon has been inhabited for some time by Sir Parzival, who received the nickname Heavenly Blade. He's fully armored. In his hands are a shield and a sword. At the moment, Sir Percival appeared in front of a huge stone monster, the size of which exceeds many times the size of an ordinary person. Against the background of such a demon, the Heavenly Blade looks very small. In the next moment, the stone monster swung his arm at the hero. The adventurer was targeted by a barrage of attacks, which he dodged quite skillfully. Noticing the hunter's approach, the stone demon lifted its leg above him to crush the guy with its weight. The foot quickly approached the hero, and the shadow on the ground became clearer and larger. Sir Percival did not shy away from the hopeful foot. He used his shield, holding it above his head. In this position, he began to expect a blow from his opponent. Sir Percival was weighed down by an incredible mountain of weight, which he successfully held with his shield. Having reached full and tight contact between the foot and the shield, the Heavenly Blade used the capabilities of the weapon. A fine explorer for self-running occurred under the stone monster's feet. From such a sharp and strong attack, the demon quickly raised its leg, which immediately began to collapse. Not realizing what had happened, the demon lost its balance and fell on its back. After the collision with the ground, an incredibly loud sound of falling rang through the entire floor. Without giving the monster time to recover, the Heavenly Blade approached the demon's head with quick movements, jumping on the stones that flew into the air. Pushing off from the stone, he swiftly bent to attack. Seeing the adventurer approaching, the stone monster covered the guy's path to his head with his own hand. Suddenly, the outline of a circle appeared in the stone palm. Quickly and skillfully, the guy made a hole to move on. Thus, he was rapidly flying towards the monster's face, on which a crystal was located in the forehead area. He was the weak point of the demon. When Sir Percival reached the crystal, he pierced it with his sword. After piercing into the crystal's body, the blade shattered it into many small pieces. As soon as the weak spot was eliminated, the entire body of the huge stone demon began to crumble, leaving only a bright light behind. One of the strongest S-class adventurers in the ranking, conqueror of more than 50 floors, is the Heavenly Blade Percival, who has just defeated the boss of the 96th floor. Putting the sword back into the scabbard, the knight ended the fight with his opponent. The light fell on him, illuminating his figure and leaving his shadow on the battlefield. Thus, the image of the winner was captured. 10 hours later, on the 95th floor, Percival stopped after a hard battle in a cave. He set up his own resting place. He built a fire on which he heated his own food. There was a stone nearby on which the guy calmly settled down. Daniel Mercurius is a noble who belongs to the 17th of the 24 great families. Being the head of the Mercurius family, he hardly participates in family affairs, but spends most of his time in dungeons around the world. A kind of swordsman, he became an adventurer at the age of 12 and received the A-class at 14. At the age of 15, he defeated the bandit Zohard and became the youngest adventurer in history to receive the S-class. He was nicknamed as the Heavenly Blade. He got this nickname from his master. Watching the young man's rapid success, people began to believe that this kid's talent was unattainable. His innate abilities and skills make him one of the greatest adventurers. Sitting in front of the campfire, Percival reflected that the preparations had paid off. He was still able to reach the 96th floor and use Endy's Shield to fight the giants. The Mercurius family owns 5 treasures passed down from generation to generation. Endy's Shield deflects physical attacks, softening the recoil. Ruik's Ring activates battle magic. Corton's Dagger provides resistance to debuffs and immunity to poisons. Barton's Amulet accumulates mana. Aloster's Bracelet reflects magic. All treasures are supreme holy objects, but no one has ever been able to use them all to their full potential. Looking at his hand, Percival clenched his fist as a sign of the seriousness of his intentions to be the first to succeed. Percival wanted to climb all 100 floors. To do this, he needs to master all the treasures of the family in action. Having conquered all the floors of the dungeon, Percival aims to defeat the last boss of the Iron Dragon alone. Suddenly, Percival began to think that no one interferes with him, so he can fight as much as his heart desires. He considered himself polished and sharpened. Most of all, he expected battles with strong enemies. The coppersmith's thoughtful expression was blank. Every time Percival thought about this goal, he withdrew into himself. His face took on a frowning and serious look, which could be a little intimidating. At the main office of the Adventurers Guild, the manager of Iador informed the guildmaster that, judging by the amount of supplies taken, Sir Percival should return from the dungeon in a few days after multiple battles with monsters. Logan expressed his doubts about asking Percival for help with the Minotaur. He is a man who is constantly looking for strength. Even if this Minotaur killed 3 C-class adventurers, he might not agree to such a thing. Then the manager of Iador noticed that if Sir Percival was attacked, he would fight back anyway. Unlike dungeon monsters that don't attack an opponent that is stronger than them, bosses can attack regardless of the opponent's strength. Therefore, the guy suggested that it was highly likely that the Heavenly Blade and the Minotaur could cross paths if the latter was still wandering outside the room. The guildmaster finished the thought that the manager had started. Having made such an assumption, no one could disagree with her. Iador added that the floor area of the maze decreases as you approach the exit. Thus, the chance of a meeting between a swordsman and a Minotaur is quite high. At this time, in the labyrinths of the dungeon on the 9th floor, Percival had already managed to seriously injure the boss of the 10th floor, wandering in search of strong opponents. The adventurer made a movement resembling a whirlwind and cut the flesh in the chest area. Blood gushed out from the newly appeared wound. The Minotaur's face was contorted with pain. After making the attack, Percival cast a casual glance towards the enemy. To the swordsman's surprise, the demon continued to stand confidently on his feet. The fact that an opponent of his level is still alive made the hero a little surprised by what he saw. After Percival's blow, the Minotaur was thrown back and his axe broke and flew some distance behind the swordsman. All the actions took place a few hours after the break on the 9th floor. Blood continued to pour in large quantities onto the floor of the dungeon corridor. Despite this, the Minotaur continued to stand on his feet and held the wound, trying to stop the blood. there was only one battle-ready axe left in his hands. Looking at the Minotaur, Persoal Mercurius noticed that he was aiming for the heart. However, he only managed to hit the muscles. This situation made the guy wonder if he had made the right calculations. While Percival was thinking about what went wrong, the Minotaur used the inventory skill he had recently acquired, from which, to the surprise of the swordsman, he took out a huge sword, also obtained in the previous battle with 3 adventurers. Watching the Minotaur's actions, Percival realized that in front of him was a new individual, differing from the previous ones in its strange behavior. However, only an adventurer who has received a blessing can master it. Percival was clearly surprised and angry at the same time, because the Minotaur managed to survive his blow. The whole situation seemed amazing and interesting to the guy. The Minotaur was in an incredible rage after receiving the attack. As always before a fight, he flared his nostrils and began to breathe deeply so that steam began to come out of his nose. And the pupils of his eyes were definitely looking at Percival, who was standing in front of him. The Heavenly Blade looked at the Minotaur indifferently and thought that they could have some fun with each other. Despite this possibility, the swordsman did not feel any joy from the upcoming battle. And so began the bloody battle between the monster and the Heavenly Blade deep underground in the Sazardon dungeon. A few years earlier, magical runes appeared in a circle above the battle arena before launching an attack. Upon noticing such an incredible spell, people watched in surprise and horror. The girl who had triggered such a powerful magic spell was smiling mysteriously and maliciously. The magician's face couldn't be seen behind her hair and the robe that covered her entire body. Percival Mercurius, who was also the opponent of the girl magician, stood waiting for the upcoming attack and, like everyone else, looked at the magical runes formed above the arena. The battle of the century brought together some of the strongest warriors. On one side, there was a heaven-smiting demon, and the invincible champion Heavenly Blade came up against her. Later, in a conversation with Guild Master Logan, Percival said that the attack was called Meteor Shower. He said that he remembered this spell well. It was used by a sorceress at a tournament 8 years ago. This conversation between the men took place at night in the main office of the Adventurers Guild, a few days before Percival Mercurius entered the labyrinth. Logan remembered a person he thought was outstanding, because this spell is extremely powerful. It takes a lot of time to cast and apply, and it also consumes a huge amount of mana. The Guildmaster then recalled what happened next. In his opinion, it was even more amazing. Listening to Logan's opinion, Percival calmly and elegantly drank tea from a set mug. In the arena, after the girl called for a meteor shower, dissecting outer space, the stratosphere, and the atmosphere, meteors flew rapidly at the speed of light to Earth, specifically to the place of the fight. Suddenly, in an instant, there was not even a reminder left of the battlefield. The cosmic bodies continued to fall into the arena non-stop and chaotically, destroying everything in their path. Such destruction posed a great threat not only to Percival, but to everyone present. So alarm reigned in the stands. People screamed and defended themselves as best they could from meteors and fragments flying in all directions. It was also amazing how the Heavenly Blade skillfully and smoothly avoided all the blows. He was moving at a fast speed, trying to avoid any meteors or rocks hitting him. His movements looked clean and were brilliantly executed. Dodging meteors coming from space, he flew out of the haze each time from the dust raised by the blows. Guildmaster Logan noticed that during that battle of the century, Sir Percival managed to dodge meteors and still remain unharmed. The Heavenly Blade, as if slightly upset and embarrassed, said that all this was the result of the fact that the girl was not aiming at him at all. Upon hearing this news, Guildmaster Logan was amazed. He hadn't expected to hear this. Percival regretted that he did not immediately realize that the target was not him, but the arena itself. He realized this because he noticed that she didn't stop no matter what. Besides, she didn't let him get close, using cunning tactics. The Heavenly Blade himself said that battle was incredible for him. She said that it was very difficult for him to attack and defend himself back then. One would have thought that he was being pushed aside. Percival went on to say that since no one expected much from the opponent of the Heavenly Blade himself, everyone was quite surprised by what was happening in the arena. Therefore, everyone watched with bated breath the unexpected appearance of cosmic bodies during the battle. The non-stop attacks with incredible speed made the audience wonder what would happen next, how it would end. During the battle, Percival, despite the unforeseen difficulties, remained quite calm and focused, and the girl playfully attacked her opponent. A mysterious and cunning smile did not leave her face. The moment Percival decided to use his cordon dagger, the girl's eyes shone, as if all this time the only thing she had been waiting for was the treasures of the Mercurius family. Suddenly, there was a sound of a bell striking. A sound wave instantly swept through the entire arena, attracting the attention of everyone present. Hearing this ringing, the duelists stopped and did not continue the battle. Then the battle between the combatants was stopped. The men announced that according to the rules of the tournament, killing an opponent and potentially dangerous attacks are prohibited. Therefore, the spell used violated this rule. It was announced that the challenger had been disqualified for violating the rules of the tournament. Thus, the winner was Percival Mercurius, who was obviously unpleasantly surprised to hear such news. The Heavenly Blade was obviously unhappy with this outcome of the battle and the judge's decision. He was so involved in the course of the battle that he didn't want to interrupt. Logan noticed that everyone could have died, but her opponent was the Heavenly Blade. The Guildmaster praised the extraordinary abilities and excellent instincts of the sorceress, as well as the ability to attack at the right moment. The Guildmaster said that no one expected such a development. This makes it even more disappointing that such a fight was interrupted. After being silent for a while, Percival agreed with what was said. He summed it up a bit desperately, saying that he was finally able to meet a great opponent then. As a man who craved more and more powerful opponents, this situation in the tournament was very depressing. After listening to Percival, the Guildmaster thought about finding out about that judge. He suspected that he had been bribed by one of the aristocrats in favor of the Mercurius house. Thinking about the whole situation, Logan is certainly not surprised by what happened. After taking a sip of tea, the Guildmaster asked the guy if that was why he wanted to enter the labyrinth. Without saying anything in response, Sir Percival only sadly took a small sip of tea. After taking a sip, he said that the tea was delicious. Logan explained that this variety is called Iodor. He added that it was not a good idea to serve cheap tea leaves to the head of the Mercurius house, so he suggested that when the guy returned from the maze, he would look in on him. After getting a positive response to the Guildmaster, Sir Percival continued with Logan, slowly sipping tea and a snack with sweets by candlelight. It's been dark outside for a long time, and night fell on the street. In the corridors of the labyrinth on the 9th floor, the battle between Percival Mercurius and the Minotaur was still going on. The sounds of battle came from all corners. The Minotaur, who was holding an axe and a huge sword as a shield, was hiding from the endless attacks of the Heavenly Blade. The swordsman continued to attack the opponent decisively, delivering clear and powerful blows. The Minotaur's body was gradually covered with wounds. Percival looked at the serious Minotaur in battle and thought that this monster was really very persistent. He also couldn't help but notice that he had muscles that were stronger than any humans, withstanding constant attacks. From pinpoint strikes, he could hide behind a weapon. And those eyes were incredible. If Percival had the opportunity to get something out of the inventory, he would have been able to handle it. But this predatory gaze does not miss any slightest movements. The Minotaur looked at the guy coldly and swung his weapon hard and tried to hit Percival, but he quickly dodged. Percival thought that since the enemy had a big sword, he would be able to use his unique technique. He raised his sword. After that, Percival swung hard and began to zigzag straight towards his opponent. His sword hit the Minotaur's sword, causing the monster to feel a lot of pressure. The force was incredible, and the Minotaur dropped his weapon. And at the same time, this blow tore off several fingers of the monster. Percival cast a cold glance at the confused monster, after which he made a leap forward, which made the monster even more surprised. Suddenly, the Minotaur noticed how Percival's knee had failed him. The guy sighed, and the monster made a conclusion. Percival continued to launch a series of attacks, but the monster quickly knocked him aside and growled loudly. The guy jumped back. The Minotaur plunged his axe into the ground, then picked it up, causing a pile of rocks to fly straight at Percival. The guy hit the stones one by one. He reached for a pocket in his armor, but a stone hit his hand, and at the same moment, a small flask fell to the floor. The Minotaur and Percival were completely frozen for a moment. When the monster saw what had fallen out of Percival's hands, he remembered what had already happened. The Minotaur quickly came to realize that the man was getting tired. In fact, Percival's body was riddled with fatigue. As a training exercise, he ran about 40 floors in a row without a break. Due to the prolonged battle with the Minotaur, he was getting more and more tired. The monster didn't understand exactly how the recovery potion worked, but it definitely couldn't pass up such a chance. The monster immediately went on the attack, throwing more and more stones at Percival. The guy fought them off quite successfully, but suddenly he noticed something unusual. The monster was attacking more aggressively and aggressively. Percival couldn't help but notice that the Minotaur wasn't letting him catch his breath. He wondered if this monster really understood everything. The Minotaur continued to attack. However, it was the same chance for Percival himself, because it was inevitable that with such crude attacks, he would begin to neglect his defense. The monster swung his axe hard, and at that moment he opened his body to attack, which the nimble Percival took advantage of. He swung his sword, after which he quickly inflicted a wound on the Minotaur's neck. The monster attacked next, but the guy successfully dodged the attack. Percival made quick and dexterous attacks, also managing to dodge, but it was too weak, and he simply could not reach the monster's key points. He was trying to figure out how he could win. Suddenly, his gaze caught on the monster's weapon. He stood firmly on the ground, which startled the Minotaur. Percival took the necessary stance and watched the monster, while the Minotaur also took the necessary position at a safe distance for him. The monster silently watched Percival. The guy was very amazed by what was happening there. The Minotaur's movements weren't instinctive, because this monster had definitely calculated the distance. He noted the overall length of the weapon and the arms quite well. This monster was not paying attention to its attack, but to Percival's steps. He calculated the distance so that the guy couldn't land a fatal attack. Besides, the Minotaur was taking a lot of risks. His powers, or the powers of Percival himself. The only question was who would concede first. Percival was really amazed by the incredible strength of the monster's spirit. The Minotaur was breathing heavily, while Percival watched in silence. Suddenly, the guy remembered the words that this is the whole maze. The lights were on evenly. Percival coldly told the monster to attack him. As if following this command, the Minotaur roared loudly, after which their continuous attacks began again. Their destructive attacks continued to rain down until drops of blood were in the air. But even then, they had no intention of stopping. Even the fire that illuminated the entire room was blazing in one direction or the other. There was continuous attack and defense, nothing superfluous. This has been going on for a long time. The Minotaur was roaring loudly, bleeding profusely, while the not-so-healthy Percival was fully focused on attacking. He was able to wound the monster in the torso, but an attack followed him. They didn't let each other stop for a moment. Watching this, the Minotaur was extremely upset. He was upset that the blood of a non-human was staining the warrior right in front of him, and it was his own blood. The Minotaur struggled for a very long time, but he was still unable to strike a single blow at this strong man. He got angry and swung hard again. Percival noticed this and took advantage of the moment, after which he spun hard again and smashed the monster's arm to the very bones. On the part of the Minotaur, it was only a reckless strike out of rage. However, the heavenly blade also missed. Percival quickly moved forward on the monster's arm, however. The monster noticed something important. He realized what had happened before for a single moment, but Percival flinched. He was at his limit, exhausted. At that moment, the Minotaur's eyes lit up with fierce rage. With incredible fury, the Minotaur turned around and then slammed Percival into the wall. The guy coughed up blood, after which he lost his last strength and flew back. The Minotaur didn't waste a chance and quickly cut off the guy's legs so that he couldn't move. Percival flew into the wall, and the Minotaur quickly headed straight for the injured guy. He swung the axe hard to finish what he had already started doing to the guy. The blade flew straight down, when suddenly Percival drew his sword and struck directly at the leg of the Minotaur, which was very close to him. The monster lost its balance and flew down, while Percival got time to attack. He swung hard again to finish off the monster. However, it wasn't that simple, and the Minotaur quickly dodged the fatal wound. At this time, Percival tried to inflict another important wound. He injured the Minotaur's arm, from which thick blood immediately flowed. The monster was enraged, when suddenly, Percival struck another blow, which went straight through the monster's eyes and fingers. The Minotaur looked at his arm, which had not a single phalanx left. At that moment, Percival struck another blow, which cut the monster's neck. The Minotaur, bleeding profusely, was thrown right into the wall, against which he hit hard. Breathing heavily, he got up from the floor and walked forward, heading straight for Percival, who was lying on the ground, exhausted. Suddenly, the monster was very surprised, realizing something amazing that was connected with this man lying right in front of him on the ground. The Minotaur was sure that he had been outsmarted. Percival was lying on the ground without a leg and languidly silent, clutching his sword to his chest so that he was in a fighting stance. The Minotaur was extremely amazed by what she saw with her own eyes at that moment. Percival was calm as he lay on the ground. The Minotaur stared in amazement at the man who was lying right in front of him. He loomed over him and looked at the way the guy was holding the sword. Malice burned in his eyes, but he remained silent. The Minotaur took a small step towards Percival, after which the guy's sword made a complete and extremely fast turn. The monster's leg was injured at the same moment, and blood sprayed out of it. The monster looked at his leg in amazement, trying to figure out what had just happened. The Minotaur immediately made a dash back so as not to get another wound from the guy who was lying on the ground. He was breathing heavily, silently observing the situation. There was something shining in the darkness at that moment, and that was the circle of light coming from Percival's sword, a murderous circle that cuts everything that comes within its boundaries. It was the circle of the death sword that belonged to Percival. The monster silently stared at Percival, thinking about how he could get closer to him. For a while, the Minotaur just thought in silence, but later he realized that if the situation was like this, then he just needed to get close somehow. It was then that the Minotaur thought about the words, somehow, because the man who was lying right in front of him was going to die soon anyway, so he could just keep waiting without trying to do anything. The Minotaur was already at the edge of his limit as well, and now he no longer had to worry about taking further risks in this fight with a strong opponent. He thought that if he just waited by his side, then victory would definitely be his. Suddenly, he grinned cruelly, after which he punched himself hard in the face. He put his paws on the ground trying to figure out what he was thinking right now. He blamed himself for his stupidity and the thoughts that had visited him now. After that, he spat out blood from his mouth, realizing the fact that he was not looking for victory there as such, but rather a battle. His main desire was to fight to the death with formidable opponents. He took a quick glance at Percival's injured leg, then remained silent thoughtfully. He thought about how he didn't need a head or a heart, but the sword that Percival was holding in his hands. He thought that it was the sword that represented this man's life on Earth. He raised his axe, after which he took a small and extremely careful step forward, almost to the very edge of the radius of Percival's sword. Listening to Gornji's breathing and the burning of a torch on one of the dungeon walls, the Minotaur took a deep breath. The Minotaur took a small step, however. He did not notice his mistake, and so he slightly crossed the boundary of light and fell under the instant attack of Percival's sword. His eyes widened greatly as he saw the swift sword reach his leg. In the blink of an eye, his hoof flew off to the side. The monster quickly stabbed his axe into the ground and leaned on it. Immediately after that, Percival's sword froze in place, and the monster just watched in silence. By giving up his leg, he slowed down the speed of someone else's sword. At that moment, there was an extremely loud crack of some kind of weapon. Percival slowly opened his eyes, after which he saw only a fragment of his powerful weapon in his hand. At that very moment, the Minotaur didn't waste any time and quickly launched an axe attack on Percival's body. Blood sprayed in all directions. The entire Minotaur was covered in red liquid from head to toe, which spread to the walls around the battlefield, along with the blood, limbs, and organs scattered to the sides. The Minotaur caught his breath heavily, looking at Percival's lifeless body. The gleam in the man's eyes disappeared completely, and the Minotaur watched it every second until he was convinced that Percival was dead. After that, he quickly pulled his axe out of the man's body and pressed it with his hand, squeezing even more red liquid onto the ground. This continued for a while, during which Percival's pupils shifted to the monster and his hand, which was still pressing down on his body. The monster pressed his hand against Percival's body, thinking that this was not enough for him, and he wanted more. The monster's thoughts feverishly consumed him as he thought about how he didn't want this man to die now. He wished Percival would let him hit him one more time, fight him back, and finally fight him one more time. Percival slowly looked at the monster, who was in despair, and then smiled lightly. All the Minotaur's blood drained from his face at that moment, and he turned very pale. There were individual parts of an incredibly strong fighter lying around. The small crystal ball cracked, after which, in the end, it broke completely, and Percival died. The Minotaur sat silently by Percival's body, watching the man's dead body. Suddenly, a bright flash of light appeared in the hallway, emanating from the guy's body. The Minotaur silently watched this bright light without making a sound. At that very moment, the phalanges of his fingers returned to their place along with his leg, which he had lost from Percival's attack. Along with this, all the numerous wounds throughout his body, which were also inflicted in the heat of a fierce battle, recovered. In the light of the level increase, the Minotaur looked at the smiling Percival and thought that it was a bit insulting that all his wounds inflicted on him by this incredible man had disappeared so easily, taking with them the memory of it. The monster breathed deeply, continuing to stare at Percival after that. Suddenly, the man's entire body began to glow until it completely turned into bright flashes of light. In the blink of an eye, Percival's body turned into numerous treasures that the Minotaur could only stare at in silence. When someone dies in the maze, the corpses of both humans and monsters disappear, leaving behind only numerous objects. The Minotaur stretched out his hand and took a small handful of treasures. He looked at these objects, after which a magic circle appeared next to him, into which he quickly placed several ornaments. After that, he quickly got up and walked to the side. The Minotaur felt sleepy, even though his wounds had healed due to the level increase. His entire body, and especially his mind, were incredibly tired from this fight. He walked slowly, leaving behind a mountain of treasures. He walked a short way up the stairs and reached another place. A few days after this event, it was raining heavily in the Sazardon maze. On the first floor of this maze, many small monsters were crawling on the ground. Suddenly, a small dagger was stabbed into one of these monsters. The monster died instantly, after which its body turned into two neat coins. Someone picked it up. A boy in rather dirty clothes smiled, looking at these coins. Suddenly, he heard someone loudly agree and tell the other that as soon as they leave the maze, they will deliver these people to the guild. The boy watched from the side as many people carried their belongings to the exit of this maze. He heard one man say that they were already considered nobles with such items, so he didn't understand why they would bring something like this to such a place. The other man said that the only thing they could be sure of was that Moran was very lucky. The boy looked at these people in disbelief and listened to their conversation. After a while, an important meeting was held at the Adventurers Guild, which was located in the city of Mikan. A rather old man apologized to Logan for being busy with his business for a long time, and because of this, he was late. The other man also apologized to Gil for disturbing him at such an inconvenient time. He asked him if the man had had breakfast. Gil only replied quietly that he had already refreshed himself a little, and it happened at an audience with the king. He raised his teacup. Logan laughed and said that he would not have expected anything else from a great sage. Immediately after that, he said that the queens were also there at that moment. Gil took a sip of tea and said that there was only the second queen. He conveyed the news that the first queen was unwell, and so they took precautions this morning. Logan noted that it was the same this morning. He suggested that the queen was talking behind the king's back. Gil sighed and asked if this meant Logan had already heard what he was thinking. The man did not answer this question directly, and therefore Gil added that he was also not completely sure about everything that was happening at the moment. Gil said that conflicts are currently arising in the palace due to the different views and positions of people in power and how they should be disposed of. He also said that after all, looking at everything with just one glance means that they simply abandon sanity. Logan took a deep breath and said that he even remembers hearing something like this before, but that was many years ago. Gil asked if his interlocutor was talking about the words that, from the point of view of people, they are monsters, but from the point of view of monsters, it is people who will be monsters. Logan quickly agreed and said that was exactly what he had heard. He also added that it is amazing. This convinced him that the way people deal with monsters and how to treat the atrocities of the people themselves is pretty unfair. He talked about the unfair standards by which all people think, and as for monsters, we talk about justice and its absence. As well as success and failure, it does not have the same meaning for them as for humans. However, Logan believed that they had something in common. Gil smiled rather gently and said that monsters and humans have one thing in common, which is the goals and values of these creatures. Logan also smiled and quickly said that his interlocutor seemed to have some kind of special relationship with monsters. After that, he asked with interest if Gil was a human being in his own right. The man gasped and said that it was quite rude because now it was really very unfair. After that, they continued to drink tea together in a warm atmosphere and laugh with common jokes. After that, the man remembered something and asked with interest what happened to the incident in which the Minotaur was involved. He said that judging by what they were saying downstairs, the monster was walking around the floors and the like. Suddenly, Logan asked Gil to wait a bit, because they've run out of tea and it should be delivered soon. There was a knock on the door, and the man asked the man to come in, expecting tea to be brought. Despite this, a rather serious guy came into the room and called the head. Logan asked if tea had been brought to them. He told Gil that he might be a beast, but he was not inferior to him in any way, and he would like to show his skills. He thought that they would be enough to do anything. Suddenly, Logan's gaze fell on the guy's rather gloomy face, and he asked if something had happened. There was a loud noise outside. The man was holding in his hand a small, round object on which all the important information about Percival was written. He said it was obvious that no matter how much they checked, nothing would change, and it was his medallion. Logan clutched the locket tightly to his chest and, with a trembling voice, asked him to check it at least once more. Gil sighed heavily and told his friend that he shouldn't upset his subordinates any further. He said that these items are really very valuable, and therefore not every adventurer can afford something like this. He also said that they should look at the number of all these items. Logan clutched the locket as Gil talked about how it was more than the highest proof of Percival's identity. Gil turned around and asked if the right group had found all these items. The girl confirmed this information and said that it was their leader named Moran. The guy said he wasn't the leader, and they weren't a band. What he found was too much to carry alone, so he hired other adventurers to do it. He also asked if these things really belonged to the Heavenly Blade, because it's just impossible. When asked on which floor they were found, the girl said that it was the 6th floor, and it was all quite close to the stairs to the 5th floor. Gil thought about the 6th floor, after which he did not understand at all what Percival could have forgotten on such a low floor. Suddenly, his attention fell on an unusual object that was lying in the general pile of things. It was a small object where he could see his own face. Moran excitedly asked the head what exactly they were waiting for. He asked the man to hurry up and evaluate the whole mountain of things. He said that if all of them really belonged to the Heavenly Blade, then for sure they are mostly just very rare items. He said that the rules say that half should be left to the one who found these items. The head was silent for a while, after which he asked Iodor if he could leave it to him. The guy politely said that he understood the order, and therefore he would carry out the necessary distribution procedure according to all instructions. He also added that he would provide a copy of the list as soon as the results of the assessment of the subjects were ready. Logan sullenly thanked Iodor, and then walked away from there. He went into his office and then hung over his desk while Gil looked at it in silence. The man closed his eyes and, after a short pause, said that among all the remains were the boots of a fool. He said they reminded him that monsters above the 50th floor don't just attack. On the way back from deeper floors, he would use the nameless sword and fool's boots as weights, and would run to the surface with a loaded body. He has already said that he does this for training and discipline. The boots of a fool are a cursed item because they significantly reduce physical abilities when equipped. Logan slammed his hand down on the table, causing slight cracks to appear on it. At the same time, Gil also said that among the remains were boots of a small-minded man. Logan spoke with incredible viciousness that it wasn't a monster that killed the Heavenly Blade, and it was probably someone who calculated the route of the Heavenly Blade and tricked him into his trap. Gil just stared at him. Logan, gritting his teeth in anger, said it was simply inexcusable. He said that in the labyrinth, it doesn't matter who a person is or where they come from, because only the Force decides between life and death. He said that this was the reason why Heavenly Blade loved the labyrinths. He turned away from both the honor and the Minsk problems from the outside, because he only wanted to be an adventurer. Logan turned around and asked Gil to help him uncover this terrible plan, because the Heavenly Blade fell right into someone else's trap. Gil was silent for a while, after which he told Logan that there was clearly something wrong with this. The man was very surprised. Gil politely asked his friend to calm down and think about it carefully, because Percival's mysterious death took place in the maze. He also said that at the moment they know for sure that there is some kind of anomaly in the maze. Logan screamed loudly and asked if his friend really thought that some monster had killed the Heavenly Blade, because it was more likely that the heavens would turn over. Gil said he could hardly believe it either. Gil asked his friend why he couldn't say the same about Isaac's daughter. The man tried to answer but couldn't find a single suitable word. Gil said that everything was as he wanted to say, because Percival's death could affect society. His person in the great family, as well as the title of Heavenly Blade, for better or worse, is very significant. However, to focus on this means to forget about the anomaly that was right in front of them. At that very moment, Logan turned very pale, understanding his friend's words. The man looked firmly at Logan and asked where the guild leader's duty was, in the outside world or in the labyrinth. Logan was angry, but he took a deep breath and closed his eyes, after which he stated that everything was exactly as Gil said. He said that while he was only thinking in one way, he had simply given up his sanity, and moreover, he had given up his responsibilities too. He sighed and said that he was not worthy of being the head of the guild. Gil held a short pause, after which he said that there is a price at which people value someone else's life, and he was interested in the answer to the question of whether this value is in the body or in the memory of this person. Gil said that judging by how angry Logan was about Lord Percival, it could mean that they were pretty close. Logan didn't say anything, after which he said that the first thing they needed to take care of right now was the Minotaur, which needed to be eliminated. By curbing and eliminating the anomaly, they can find out how much they are connected to the Heavenly Blade. So he decided to ask Gil again for help in lending him some of the man's strength. He made this request, not just to a friend, but to the great sage Gil Rinks. At this time, a large drop of water fell directly into a small lake. In the boss room, which was on the 10th floor of the Sazardon maze, the Minotaur was sitting quietly. The monster heard some sounds and slowly opened its eyes. There were adventurers right next to him who admired the boss on this floor. The guy in the armor said that they also say that the more unique the monster, the greater the chance of dropping items. The magician asked them to wait and asked if they really just wanted to watch. He said they should leave this little thing alone and move on through the maze. The guy came forward and said that these were just small things, because in any case, he would like to torture their team in the case before entering the 30th floor. The girl agreed and said that a warm-up would certainly not hurt them. The magician sighed and said that, in the end, it always ends the same way. When he saw that the people were approaching him, the Minotaur turned menacingly and looked at the people. He straightened his shoulders and stood up, looking down at them. The man in the armor grinned and said that the monster was even bigger than he'd expected. He was somewhat surprised by how big the Minotaur was. The magician opened her book and said that even though he was so huge, he was still the same Minotaur. She said that she was already ready, and therefore they should finish as soon as possible and move on. The girl with the ponytails took out the stab guns and said that she was already fully prepared, after which she asked how long they would figure it out. The guy in the armor smiled broadly and grinned, after which he said that he wished the rumors would not deceive them, and they would get at least a couple of rare items from this monster. The Minotaur just silently looked at the self-confident people who were already rushing straight at him, wanting to get some good items. The guy in the armor ran straight at him and shouted loudly, raising his weapon. At the same moment, the Minotaur swung his arm violently, after which he hit the guy hard all over his body, which instantly turned him into nothing but remnants. The Minotaur took a small stone and very quickly threw it at the magician, who did not even have time to realize what was happening. A small stone hit her head, after which she immediately died. The girl with the ponytails didn't have time to understand anything. She turned sharply in the direction of her dead friends and asked what had happened. At the same time, the Minotaur came very close to her and stretched his hoof over her to finish her off. The Minotaur completely destroyed the poor girl with just one step. The three of them instantly disappeared, and bright sparks appeared in their place, which almost immediately turned into many different objects. Although the Minotaur did not know this, however, the level of all these adventurers was not much lower than the 30th level. The Minotaur used to have the same level, but everything changed after that hard battle in which he defeated Percival and killed him. After the small attack was completed, the Minotaur reached into the river and took some water, after which he greedily drank it all. After finishing the water, he remained in the same position, watching the water. He took his hand away and took a deep breath, after which he finally began to rise from his knees. When he stood up, the Minotaur sat back down in the same place where he was before. This time, the level had developed more than just physical strength for him. It was an amazing, incredible leap in intelligence. Initially, even among monsters with low intelligence, the Minotaur was especially intelligent. However, due to this increase in level, information analysis, recognition, planning, memory, situation assessment, all intellectual abilities have jumped dramatically. The monster closed his eyes and was silent for a long time. With his new, more developed consciousness, the Minotaur thought about that fight with Percival. In his own mind, his own attacks and those of the enemy surfaced one after another. He immediately recalled them and replayed them over and over in his head. And at that very moment, the Minotaur once again realized the truth. He realized that he had won a battle that he shouldn't have won. He had terrible moves, but he also had an amazingly strong opponent. For the first time. This was the first time for the Minotaur to fight so hard that it shook him to the depths of his heart. The monster grinned slyly, realizing all these things. That beautiful soul that Percival drew on the borders of the void was clearly etched into the Minotaur's memory. That he would never be able to forget about it, even if he really wanted to. In a quiet maze, a pack of monsters was trying to find some food for themselves, but they suddenly heard a sound that startled them greatly. Noticing this, they immediately rushed to escape from a fairly dark corner of the maze. Suddenly, an extremely large monster's hoof stepped right in front of them. A broad and formidable Minotaur stepped forward and walked around, straining everyone who was nearby with just his being. Suddenly, a low staircase appeared right in front of the monster's feet. The Minotaur was looking at the top of this staircase, or more precisely, at exactly where it led. He understood that the higher he climbed, the weaker the monsters became, but that swordsman, the battle with whom he had so firmly stuck in his memory, aspired to the top. The Minotaur silently looked up, thinking that he incredibly wanted to see the place where the strong swordsman was heading. He hoped, he believed, that maybe there he would find what he was so desperately looking for. He went straight up the stairs, anticipating even more incredible battles, and with it, even more deadly fights. Stepping through the bodies of the adventurers, the tyrant has awakened, and very soon, an unprecedented calamity will come to the surface. Gil Rinks is the elder of the Magic Academy of the Kingdom of Baladamost, a legendary personality whose exploits and jokes are told like fairy tales. For Logan, he is also a companion with whom he traveled from a young age, and a mentor who taught him the craft of an adventurer. At this time, on the 7th floor of the Sazardon maze, there was a small group of people who were hiding in a corner of the maze. The girl in the armor quietly asked her sister if that was really what they were talking about. She was quite tense when she asked about it. The blonde-haired girl awkwardly said that she had never seen such a big and hairy monster before. She asked her sister Neslo if that was exactly the case. A girl with a serious expression and dark hair said that this was definitely the monster with a head like a cow's. They were hiding in a corner, while a huge Minotaur was walking towards them with slow steps. The girl in the armor asked her sister what they could do. Neslo said it would be pretty stupid of them to just attack her right in the face. She sighed and said she was using her Wonker arrow. Neslo said that one arrow could kill an ordinary Minotaur easily, so they could measure its strength in one shot. The girl peeked around the corner a little, then pulled the string of her bow and clung. She released her finger and released her arrow, which flew straight into the Minotaur's stomach. However, it wasn't that simple, and the monster carefully raised his axe, which he used to shield himself from the attack. The girl's arrow stuck onto the monster's axe, and there was silence for a while. Immediately after that, the Minotaur had an explosion. Neslo's arrow exploded and everything was in smoke. 3 girls were hiding around the corner and waiting for what would happen from this explosion. At this time, the remains of the broken hammer fell to the ground with a small weight. The Minotaur just stared at the bones sticking out of his hand, and the palm itself was gone. Neslo was very surprised that he had only lost his wrist. The girl gasped and said that it only meant that this monster was very strong, and at the same time, it meant that it was rare. However, she was glad that it had worked, and now without his arm, his strength had been cut in half. She thought that if they could get rid of his other hand as well, then he would be completely helpless. The monster silently looked at the remains of his arm, and then remembered how in one of his previous fights, a man also lost his arm, but he used some pills, after which his arm immediately recovered. The monster stabbed something into the ground, then extended his whole arm into the magic circle that appeared behind his back. The three sisters turned pale with shock and fear when they noticed that some monster was capable of using such magic. After a few moments, the Minotaur pulled out a couple of pills, which he immediately popped into his mouth. He bit into the small pills, after which the liquid inside them splashed over his teeth. At the same moment, his arm that had fallen off was restored, and he just watched in silence as it happened. Neslu paled even more when she saw this. She felt a terrifying fear that chilled her to the very foundations. She looked at her sisters and screamed loudly that they should run away from there as fast as possible. The girls immediately ran away from there as fast as possible. Neslo took brief glances back, thinking that this was an extremely frightening situation, and this, in her opinion, simply could not be possible. She understood the fact that inventory and potions are something that only humans can use. Only certain adventurers who are blessed through their oath to the spirits. She looked back again, and her face paled even more. She looked at the Minotaur that was following them, and thought that he was not just a rare, but an impossible monster. The monster clenched and unclenched his right hand, staring in amazement at how this was happening. Like many amazed adventurers, the Minotaur was also very surprised by what he saw with his own eyes. It was a red liquid that he used just by following people. The Minotaur was incredibly impressed by the effect that increased his stamina, as well as healing wounds, especially restoring lost limbs. An incredible amount of energy shone around the Minotaur as he continued to stare at his hand. He opened the inventory window, then quickly pulled out an axe. He took it out of the ground and then walked slowly through the maze. At this time, on the outskirts of Mycenae City, the labyrinth of Sazardon was quite busy. There was a small signboard at the entrance, which said that this building was a gathering place for adventurers. Many people were talking among themselves on the first floor of the guild. At the same time, a small pearl was lying on the leaves, resembling a lotus flower. Logan sat at his desk and carefully examined all the documents and books that were on his desk. The man put the book back on the table, thinking that he had not expected anything less from the Heavenly Blade. He thought about how it would take him more than a month to evaluate all these many items. He straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath, after which his gaze fell on the pearl lying on the edge of his desk. He immediately remembered Gil, who had given him this unusual item. At this very moment, he was deeply thinking about this Minotaur, and the fact that he completely did not understand what was going on in this maze. He wanted to know what was going on in this maze. He wanted to know what was going on. The man thought that since the first report, he had been seen above and below the 10th floor. And if you look at it another way, it has already been confirmed that he can move between floors, as if he were a real adventurer. There were thoughts in the man's head that this monster had suddenly become an adventurer, but it sounded like complete nonsense. He dismissed his thoughts, and thought that if he assumed that such a thing was even possible, then it would not hurt for him to draw up a general picture of it. He understood that adventurers could gain various advantages in the maze, one of which was moving between floors. In addition, there is no denying that there are also effects from potions and inventory. There was also another advantage in his head, and thinking about it, his blood froze in horror, and he turned pale from shock. The man realized that this is the advantage of increasing the level. If the Minotaur is like a real adventurer, it means that he can raise his level by defeating enemies, and with this, he will gain experience. As the level increases, both the physical and mental abilities of all adventurers increase. He thought that this explained the incident that had happened to Pasha's entire group. If the Minotaur has been leveling up all this time, it means that he could easily kill them, gaining enough experience points and increasing strength and intelligence. Suddenly, the man froze, realizing an important detail of this case. Logan fully understood the fact that it was possible to gain much more experience by defeating stronger and more experienced enemies. He thought about what if we assume a situation in which this Minotaur killed the Heavenly Blade. He swallowed his saliva, after which he thought with horror about what level this monster could already be. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Iador quickly called the head of his position. Logan was very scared and screamed in fear. He calmed down more or less and told Iador that he shouldn't scare him like that, because it could be dangerous. The guy awkwardly said that he had knocked on the door, but Logan himself did not hear it. The guy leaned on the front door and asked the head if he was okay, because his skin was incredibly pale and he was sweating profusely. Logan exhaled and said that everything was fine, but the fact that he was thinking about it, and in what quantities, made him feel more and more suffocatingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. He decided to distract himself from these thoughts, and asked Iador what had happened, and why he had come. The guy calmly relayed the information that representatives of the Mercurius family were there, and they have something they would like to talk about with the guild head. The man was very surprised and asked if he had heard correctly that they had guests from the Mercurius family themselves. He asked Iador, somewhat perplexed, if they had not told him exactly what had happened to the Heavenly Blade, Percival. Iador said that everything is exactly as it is, and they are still preparing to send the notification. Logan thought deeply. He assumed that this meant that it wasn't about the Heavenly Blade at all, but he didn't know why Mercurius's representative would come to them. He just remained silent for a long time, thinking about it. He said that he understood everything and then asked Iador to invite them there. He told them to come to him. Iador obediently went down and addressed the Lord Panja Laban, as well as Julius from the Zeldger family. He politely asked them to come upstairs with him, straight to Logan. A rather tall man who looked very stern walked into the guild leader's room. There was a little boy standing next to him, who was also looking at the head. The man said that his name was Panja Laban. Logan bowed low and said that it was a great honor for him to be able to welcome such a noble guest. He said that he was the head of the Mycenae Adventurer Guild, and his name was Logan. Ador took out a teapot, after which he quickly poured a couple of cups of hot drink and put them on the table. Immediately after, he bowed and left the room. Logan sat down at a small sofa, after which he extended his hand and invited his guest to sit next to him and have tea. The guest sat down opposite Logan, and after that there was silence in the room, which did not last very long. Panja Laban lowered his head and turned to Logan, saying that he was very sorry for coming to him without any warning. The man was surprised, after which he said that he had previously heard that Panja Laban wanted to discuss something with him. The man said that it was, but first he would like to introduce Mr. Julius to Logan. As he spoke, he pointed at the little boy who was sitting next to him. Logan was a little surprised when he heard such an official address in relation to the child. Panja Laban said that he is actually an escort. He added that Zelgar is the surname of Mr. Julius's mother house. His father belongs to the House of Mercurius. He said that Mr. Julius has been recognized as the legitimate heir of the current head of the Mercurius family, Mr. Percival Conde de Mercurius Monis. Logan paled slightly after hearing the news. He was in complete shock and was trying to figure out what this meant and how this boy could be the heir to the head. When the information finally reached him, he jumped up from his seat and shouted loudly, asking what it meant, and if it was true that this was the son of the Heavenly Blade. He asked if that meant Percival was married. Panja Laban and Julius were only awkwardly silent, and when the guild leader noticed this, he came to his senses and froze, feeling ashamed. He bowed low and apologized to them for his shouting, after which he said that it was a very rude act on his part. Panja Laban just smiled and told the owner Logan that he had no need to lower his head. He also said that adventurers have their own etiquette, and in fact, it is Panja Laban and Julius who are strangers in Logan's land. He stated that this was the case, not to mention that Logan was Lord Percival's mentor and good friend, as well as the head of the Adventurer Guild himself. Panja Laban said that their master always said that he was much more comfortable in the guild only because of Logan's care. He also said that their master's quest for adventure began here, and they are very grateful to both the Labyrinth and the guild leader for this. It was their gratitude that their lord returned home with a smile whenever he spent time in Mycenae. He said that it was necessary so that the Heavenly Blade could. But in the middle of his sentence, he said that this was not the case, and changed the address to Mr. Percival. Logan was just awkwardly silent the whole time. Panja Laban was silent for a while, after which he closed his eyes and said that they should move on to the main business, which was why they were there. He said he wanted Logan to see something important. He stretched out his hand behind his back, after which a magic circle immediately appeared there, which signified the inventory. When Logan saw this, he was very surprised that Panja Laban had such a thing. The man carefully pulled out a small box with a beautiful design from the inventory. Logan wondered who Panja Laban was. He opened the box, and inside it they could see a neat crystal ball. Panja Laban said that his master's flame of life can be seen with the help of this crystal ball, because everything is displayed on it. Logan listened to him quietly, taking in every detail of the story. At this time, a small pearl was shining on Logan's desk. Panja Laban said that he chose this because Mr. Julius's daily task was to check this crystal ball at least once or twice a day, but by evening, the flame of this crystal ball had gone out. He also added that there was nothing unusual yesterday morning. Julius listened in silence to what Panja Laban was saying, but at some point his face darkened greatly from what he heard. Panja Laban turned to Logan and politely said that if he knew anything about Milord's whereabouts, it would be nice for him to tell about it, as the guys were very worried and wanted to know about it. Logan listened to this in silence, his face dark. As soon as Panja Laban finished speaking, Logan picked up a small bell and rang it with finger movements. Almost immediately after that, Iador came into the room and apologized for bothering him. Together with the other servants, he brought in a small document and tea. He handed the document to Panja Laban, after which he politely invited the man to sign the receipt where he indicated. The man signed pretty quickly. As soon as everything was completed, Iador again apologized for the intrusion and quietly left the room where tension was building up. There was a deathly silence in the room, which Logan interrupted. He said that there was a letter on the table in front of him which was addressed to the house of Julius and Panja Laban. There was also a large list of items that they had purchased along with Lord Percival's adventurer medallion. With a serious expression on his face, he said that yesterday, on the 6th floor of the Southern Labyrinth, the remains of Lord Percival were to Southern Labyrinths. After he said this, the man added that he was very sorry for what had happened. Panja Laban and Julius remained silent. Logan could only apologize to them for having to deliver such terrible news. Panja Laban stared at the small letter in his hand in silence. Logan closed his eyes in shame when suddenly little Julius started talking about his father. Logan opened his eyes and looked at the boy quietly, waiting for what he would say next. Julius, with tears in his eyes, asked if this was really what his father had so ardently dreamed of. Logan's heart ached when he had to watch such grief. Panja Laban said that earlier their lord always said that he really liked a maze, and every good battle was there, and that even if one day he would fall in that very maze, it would be exactly what he dreams of most. Logan thought about how fighting and overcoming all these monsters sounded like what Heavenly Blade would really say. The man said that they are conducting an investigation right now, and sooner or later they will resolve this issue. When he said that, he changed the wording and said they would solve it now. With a stern expression on his face, Logan said that this man would certainly bring everything to light. He wanted to know exactly what happened to Lord Percival, as well as what happened to the Minotaur. With tears in his eyes, Julius looked at Logan as he finished his speech. After that, the man sighed and cast his gaze at the object that was lying on his desk. The man said that he is his friend, as well as his mentor. He thought that the great sage would surely defeat this terrible Minotaur and figure out what the matter was. The object on Logan's desk was just lying there at that time. At that time, there was a Minotaur in the depths of the maze, who destroyed various entities one by one using his sword. When the huge Minotaur destroyed another monster that was on the 4th floor in the boss room, which, in turn, was in the Sazardon maze, he slightly let go of his sword. He reached for a small object with his hand, picking up a potion from the ground of the dungeon. Suddenly he froze, feeling that something was approaching him. His premonition did not let him down, and therefore, the moment the monster raised his gaze, he saw out of the corner of his eye how a spherical spell was rushing straight towards him at great speed. The Minotaur saw this at a good enough time to dodge the attack and save his life. He looked to the side, watching as the spell began to change shape incredibly quickly. The Minotaur was very surprised when he noticed such a change in the magic sphere. In the next instant, the sphere exploded, causing a huge flash of light to illuminate the entire small cave in which the Minotaur was located. A huge cloud of smoke covered the entire area of the cave, after which it slowly began to dissipate. At the moment when the dust had almost disappeared, a man's armored foot stepped forward. Gil, fully dressed in first-class armor, stood with his arm outstretched and silently stared at the monster in front of him. Gil waited for the moment when the dust would clear enough for him to see this Minotaur. In the next instant, the monster rushed forward with a loud roar. He was rushing straight at Gil, who in turn was using magic spheres one after another. Each of these spheres began to change their shape, creating explosions. The Minotaur did not want to fall for this again, so he jumped high up and jumped over all the explosions. With a loud roar, he charged at Gil, wanting to kill the man. Gil wasn't nervous at all, so he stood silently and watched as the huge monster approached him. Gil snapped his fingers quickly. Because of this, the Minotaur, who was already a couple of meters away from him, was stabbed by many strong stab wounds. The monster coughed up blood as Gil watched in silence. Suddenly, the Minotaur clenched his jaw tightly, and upon seeing this, Gil turned pale with surprise. At that very moment, the Minotaur swung his sword so that it pierced right into Gil's shoulder. The blow was strong enough for the sword to go extremely deep. Gil froze in shock. Gil carefully removed the large ring from his ring finger, after which he took a light breath at the flower that lay on his hand. At that moment, a small pearl appeared in the center of the flower. With a smile, Gil handed the item to his friend and told him that he should take it before he left. Logan looked at the neat object, then asked if it was the Pearl of Ceruria. Gil also said that she was called to his stream of life, and as long as he was alive, she would continue to shine. He told Logan that he was giving it to him in case the incident that Percival had already encountered happened again. Gil picked up his helmet, which was lying on the sofa, then looked at his friend and said that if this light went out, he should immediately report it to the palace. Logan was in doubt, so he told Gil that, after all, he had heard that the King of the Dead had granted Gil an immortal body in return for paying the debt. Gil laughed and looked at his friend with a smile, after which he said that various rumors about him had even stopped surprising him. Currently, Gil's hand was pierced by the sword of a cruel and extremely dangerous monster that only wants battles. The monster was in limbo, impaled on sharp spikes created by Gil, while the man himself, at the same time, was pierced by the Minotaur's sword. The monster looked at Gil with an incredible thirst for blood, continuing to plunge the sword into him. Suddenly, the Minotaur noticed some flashes. The monster was surprised and scared by what he saw. Gil quietly cast the Thunder Bomb spell. At this very moment, the many sharp lightning bolts that the Minotaur was on burst in, and many electric charges passed through his body. The burning monster hung in the air with its mouth open, unable to do anything. When it was over, he collapsed onto his back and rolled on the ground. The burning body of the monster lay on the ground at the moment when Gil walked slowly towards it, feeling no fear. He was thinking that this Minotaur's strength couldn't be compared to an ordinary Minotaur, and he had at least a level 40th. Gil thought it was really amazing, but not so amazing that he could handle Percival in his time. He was sure that the monster was already dead. Suddenly, the Minotaur reached out his hand and opened the inventory. He reached for something, and when Gil saw it, he was very amazed. The Minotaur quickly pulled out a large number of pills from his inventory. He quickly and greedily threw all the pills into his mouth and bit into them, drinking the contents. Gil looked at it and thought that he was doing it just like an adventurer. He thought about how in all the 50 years he had been an adventurer, this was the first time he had seen such a monster that was able to use inventory. He looked at the Minotaur and wondered what was going on in this maze. After absorbing all the pills, the monster began to recover quickly, rising to its feet. Gil wondered if it was possible that this Minotaur was the embodiment of an evil spirit. The Minotaur exhaled heavily and looked at Gil with a thirst for a good battle. At the same time, the pearl was just lying on the table in the office of the head, who was in the city of Mycenae. All the people there were silently sitting and looking at each other. Panja Laban put down a small notebook on the table, after which he turned to Mr. Logan, who was sitting directly opposite him. He said that the personal belongings of the deceased belonged only to the guild and the finder of these things, and the presence of a will does not affect this in any way. However, if this case concerns one of the noble families, then they have an advantage in buying back the items. Logan said that everything is exactly as Panja Laban said. The man said that, in that case, they want to buy back the 3 artifacts that are on this list. Logan read the list, which included Reika's ring, Barton's talisman, and Angel's shield. Logan thought that he had never heard of such artifacts before, but he told them that he did not see any difficulty in this. Julius held up a mug of tea, while Logan talked about how he couldn't name the price of these items before he did an evaluation. Panja Laban also said that it doesn't matter at all how much it will all cost. The man also said that this is where his other question begins. He said that Carden's dagger, as well as Alistair's bracelet, as quite important artifacts, are not mentioned in this list. Panja Laban seriously asked how he should understand this. Logan was very surprised when he heard about Alistair's bracelet. He understood exactly what this artifact was, and that's why he was so surprised by what he heard. Panja Laban said that it was a supreme artifact bestowed by the spirit of Farah to the first king, which was later given to the head of the house of Mercurius. He also said that without this item, his master Julius would not be able to become the rightful heirs of the House of Mercurius. Logan was surprised, thinking that it seemed that when the head of House Mercurius took over, he should go to the palace wearing Alistor's bracelet and also request an audience. Panja Laban continued, saying that even then, His Majesty, picking up the bracelet, recognizes the sign of the family's loyalty to the king and announces the new head to his subjects. It's just a formality, but their family will lose face if the head doesn't have Alistor's bracelet. He said that this was the reason why they needed to get it back as soon as possible, and if they could wait a little longer with the dagger, they simply couldn't do that with Alistor's bracelet. Logan fell silent, lost in thought. He said that they should think about it in order to understand everything and not miss anything. Logan said that all Percival's belongings were found on the 6th floor, but the question is, what could have happened to them in that place? Panja Laban also said that he did not think that their master could have lost them, and these are supreme artifacts, and it was hard to believe that they could be damaged or broken. Logan also said that, thus, they can assume that at the time of Percival's death, someone could have simply taken these items with them. Panja Laban wondered if someone could have taken it. After thinking about it, he said that he thought there was a possibility that someone could steal from him after his death. Immediately after that, he fell silent. The man said that it was probably rude, but he would like to know if all the items were handed over to the guild by those who found these things. Logan said it was true. He said that the moment someone brings things to the guild, they question him on the magic circle. They checked all 19 people, including the finder, that all the items found had been returned. They also asked them if it was related to the death of the owner, or if he knew something about it. They confirmed that they were all above suspicion. Logan was also confident in their checkpoint, because no third person could have carried something without being noticed. He added that there was no point in stealing something if he could take it to the guild and receive the appropriate reward. Panja Laban was silent for a while, after which he asked about the version of events in which someone, wanting to harm the House of Mercurius, lured their master Percival into a trap and stole these 2 items. He also said that this man may still be hiding in the depths of the labyrinth of Sazardon. Logan said that he understood this hypothesis, after which he said that, in other words, as soon as the news of Percival's death became known, they would be forced to appoint an heir, and they could demand House Mercurius to return the bracelet. He said that even a well-trained, experienced adventurer would not be able to last long in the maze, and his maximum would be a week. Anyway, it's impossible. Panja Laban said that if the 2-time Dragon Slayer says so, then he believes his words. Logan smiled and said that Panja Laban knows quite a lot about the old days of the guild leader. The man said that if we talk about artifacts, he believes that they have the seal of the owner. Panja Laban said that it was natural because they were engraved with elite seals with detection magic. Ever since the crystal ball went out, their 2 runamasters had been closely watching the seals, but there had been no response from them. Logan said that if there is no signal from outside, it means that the missing items are still in the maze. So it's possible either the killer just left them or lost them at the exit of the maze. At that very moment, Logan looked away, thinking about another outcome of events in which the Minotaur took the artifacts for himself. Panja Laban noticed the unusual reaction and asked Logan if it was possible that he remembered something. The man came to his senses and said that this was not the case, or to be more precise, he could tell him the details of the case, which he did. At the end of the story, Panja Laban summed up the fact that there is a powerful, anomalous Minotaur in the labyrinth. He thought about it. Immediately after that, he turned to Logan and said that if Mr. Gill was exploring the maze, he thought it would be better for them to wait for him to return. But it just so happened that he simply could not continue to sit there and waste so much time. He said it might be brazen, but he would like to ask permission for their delegation to enter the maze. Inside, they will search floor by floor, and also take the master with them, and search everything up to the 6th floor and hope that the killer still lost the items. Logan said that the guild has no right to allow those who are not adventurers to enter the maze, but he definitely had doubts. Panja Laban has firmly stated that he is fully aware of all the risks. Logan paused. He said that he understood, after which he stated that, in that case, they would need a guide and a guard. After all, they couldn't completely rule out the possibility of being trapped. Logan smiled and held up his finger, saying that he hoped they wouldn't be against this old man who had been retired for 20 years. At this time, in the boss room, which was on the 4th floor of the Sazardon maze. There was a tall Gil watching his enemy. The Minotaur cleared his throat heavily as Gil stared at him. Suddenly, the man snapped his fingers, creating many sharp stakes, sending them straight at his enemy. The Minotaur quickly jumped back from there, but one of the enemy's arrows still hit, thereby cutting off the monster's foot. After that, the Minotaur rolled head over heels on the rocks, while Gil, having created a shield for himself, slowly moved right behind him. The monster continued to roll. As he got closer, Gil raised his hand and began to collect magical energy at the tips of his finger. The next moment, he aimed a fire bullet at the Minotaur. The monster clung tightly to the wall, after which it also bounced off it strongly, thereby protecting itself from the attack. Gil twisted his hand, after which the fireball changed its trajectory and headed after the monster. The Minotaur was very surprised, but he didn't have much time for that. The fireball crashed into him with all its speed, and the Minotaur screamed loudly. The force of the attack drove him into the opposite wall, from which he later slid down. Gil watched in silence as the monster lost to him. The Minotaur fell to the ground, after which he again reached into his inventory for medicine. He ate a large amount of pills again and got up from the ground with a heavy cough. He looked at Gil and thought that he was strong. He looked old, but his power was just huge, and he even cast spells. The Minotaur realized that he was completely different from the last sorcerer he had fought. The Minotaur thought that he was like that man Percival. The monster grinned broadly. Gil realized that ranged attacks were not enough because the Minotaur could still get potions. He decided what he was going to do. Gil stretched his arms out to the sides and created magic at their ends. Immediately after that, he rose from the ground and flew at great speed at the monster. The Minotaur was taken aback, noticing that this man was flying at him with incredible speed. He swung his arm and tried to hit him, but Gil was faster. The Minotaur swung his axe, wanting to win, but Gil quickly waved his hand and attacked the Minotaur. With this attack, he completely destroyed the arm of the Minotaur, who was looking in that direction, in shock. The monster roared loudly as Gil charged straight at him. The hard battle between the old sorcerer and the Minotaur continues. The man attacks the monster with lightning speed. He strikes him with crushing blows. The sword that the Minotaur was holding flies out of his paws and flies into the wall, and the creature itself is transported to the side. The magician, clearly seeing his target, rushes towards the monster. His eyes are full of determination and some rage towards the monster. A man is full of courage and perseverance to defeat the enemy. The Minotaur opens a magic circle portal to find something useful in it. The Minotaur feels some fear towards the attacks of the old sorcerer, so the creature thinks to himself that he needs something that would help him hit the magician and something that could withstand his speed. Suddenly, the Minotaur gets an idea. He pulls his hand out of the portal, having found something that, in his opinion, will help against the sorcerer. Then he pushes off the wall with all his might and heads towards the sorcerer. Thanks to this, the monster appears above the magician and directs its huge paws in his direction. The Minotaur is full of hatred for the enemy. The sorcerer thinks to himself that it is useless and creates a bright ball of magic. The two limbs of a monster and a human are practically colliding. Suddenly, the sorcerer's spell evaporates. The old man is perplexed. He doesn't understand what kind of magic it is that can vaporize his powerful enough spell. Suddenly, he notices a ring on the monster's finger. The old magician wonders if this is really Alastor's bracelet. This jewelry is one of the family artifacts of the House of Mercurius, capable of absorbing and evaporating any magic. The man doesn't understand how a monster can use such a powerful artifact. His bewilderment and surprise reaches the highest level. The action shifts to the spacious office of the head of the guild, the old warrior Logan. The man communicates with the warrior guard of young Master Julius, telling him that if he is not mistaken, then the spirit has imposed a restriction on the bracelet. Panja Laban, frowning and deep in thought, say that this is really so. Logan, looking at the interlocutor with interest, continues, saying that this restriction does not allow other people to use the power of the bracelet. Young Mr. Julius's escort confirms his words. Then the man, furrowing his brows and staring intently at one point, says that only the head of the family can use the jewelry. Then he makes a reservation, recalling the exceptions to this rule, which surprises the old warrior. In the end, Logan looks at him in surprise. Laban then continues, saying that the bracelet can also be used by someone whom the head of the family sincerely recognized. The action shifts back to the Minotaur, who, with a huge amount of rage written on his face, attacks the magician. The monster, enraged, swoops down on the enemy and opens its bestial mouth, making monstrous sounds that accompany the powerful blows of the beast. Then the monster slams the magician into the floor with all his might. From the impact of the monster, a deep crater appears in the stone floor, into which the sorcerer is immured. When this crater appears, a lot of fragments and stones fly in all directions due to a strong blow from the monster's fist. The fist of the monster immures the sorcerer quite deeply. Only his lifeless hand is visible from the old man. Suddenly, the Minotaur draws attention to the sorcerer's hand. The ring, which was in the magician's hand, begins to emit a bright light, so bright that it is able to illuminate the entire room of the dungeon. The Minotaur is alarmed when he sees such a suspicious light. Then thick white steam starts billowing out of Gil's body. The Minotaur thinks that this is not all. He looks intently at what is happening to the body of the old magician. The monster furiously clenches his teeth, anticipating something bad. Then, trying to prevent the resurrection of such a strong opponent, he delivers another crushing blow to the magician, and then nonstop, breaking the floor even more, begins to beat with his powerful paws in the place where the old man's lifeless body is located. He hits the defenseless mage over and over again. Suddenly, due to strong and rather crushing blows, the magician's hand comes off and flies away. The monster roars furiously and continues to deliver its mighty, crushing blows, kneading the enemy into mush. The Minotaur turns the magician and the entire space around him into a mad mess. The monster stops only when it begins to seem to him that the magician will definitely not survive after such a thing. Then he looks carefully at the place where the old man used to be, where his powerful paw is now buried among the stones. He exhales with relief. Suddenly, something strange starts happening. Dark smoke filled with sinister energy begins to emanate from the mash of stones in the human body. It weaves the entire surrounding space with a dark web. The Minotaur looks in bewilderment, surprise, and horror at the place where the lifeless body of the severely powerful magician used to lie. Then he senses danger coming from the pit and instantly jumps back. The darkness emanating from the crater created by the monster gradually begins to thicken and becomes saturated with energy. Vortices of dense, already shaped dark energy rise up, rushing towards the dark sky of the dungeon. The monster is perplexed and cautiously looks at the pillars of dark, already condensed energy that appeared from the old man's former body. There is no limit to the surprise of the Minotaur. He begins to be overwhelmed by fear of a phenomenon previously unknown to him. At this point, the reader remembers Logan's words, that the king of the dead had given Gil an immortal body in payment of a debt. Suddenly, what once was a man appears in the sky, namely the old sorcerer, Gil. After a deadly battle, the old mage turned into something terrifying. This something stares stubbornly in the direction of the Minotaur, and then begins to pull towards him, its terrible and strange clumps of unknown dark energy, similar to limbs. The Minotaur looks at the enemy with surprise and a certain amount of fear, and does not understand what it is. Something that was once an old magician continues to pull its terrifying limbs towards the monster. But then he makes a lunge that is invisible to either the human eye or the monster's eye, thanks to which he instantly grabs the Minotaur by his previously severed and bleeding limb. The whip tightly covers the severed limb of a mighty and majestic beast, squeezing the bloodstream and starting to decompose it quite quickly, creating an unpleasant sight. The monster, feeling obvious discomfort, looks at what is happening with bewilderment and surprise. Then he tries with all his might to free his paw, which was already injured during the fight with the sorcerer, who still looks like a man, from the devil's captivity. At that moment, the creature realizes that this something is causing its flesh to rot and decompose. The Minotaur tries to break the whip by physical force, striking it with his powerful but indestructible blows for the former sorcerer. The great monster is ready to do anything to free himself from the scourge of the sorcerer. Then he tries to use the bracelet to free himself from captivity, which causes him such serious damage and severe physical pain. He starts hitting the whips with his wristband, hoping that it will dispel the sorcerer's whips, and if he is lucky, then his entire body. But it's all useless. Then the Minotaur decides to take a very desperate step. He tightly embraces his life-beaten limb, clenches his teeth, and pulls on it with great force. The paw comes off and flies off after the whip of the former old magician. The magician looks at the prey he has caught with some surprise and anger from the failed hunt and gradually begins to decompose it. During this action, dark energy flies around the magician, so dark that it can reduce the amount of light in an already dark dungeon. The Minotaur, full of rage due to the loss of another piece of his limb, prepares to attack the enemy he hates so much. He gets into a stance that will allow him to instantly dodge the blows of the creature that the magician has turned into. The sorcerer looks at the Minotaur with his 3 glowing holes that look like eyes, and the Minotaur looks at him with his eyes, which are now more human-like compared to the magician. The monster flares its nostrils in rage. The place where the limb used to be is bleeding terribly. The beast opens a magical portal to get the potions he needs to heal such a serious wound. But the magician suddenly attacks the beast. The Minotaur dodges a surprise attack and drops potion cones that he could use to heal his severed limb in battle. The cones fly away to a distance that is insurmountable in this situation by the Minotaur. Then the magician starts attacking the Minotaur non-stop. He successfully dodges all the blows inflicted by the creature that was once a sorcerer. But suddenly, the monster realizes that he still missed one blow. The magician was able to catch the monster by its leg. Gil looks at the Minotaur. A hint of glee can be seen on his no longer human face. Then he begins to pull his whip limbs towards himself, and at the same time tightly squeezes the Minotaur's leg. The Minotaur's face is distorted with horror and confusion. The beast opens a portal with an inventory and begins frantically rummaging through it, hoping to find something that will help in opposing the sorcerer, since his blows do not cause damage to him. Suddenly, the Minotaur finds something that might help in his confrontation with the sorcerer. It turned out to be a tiny golden dagger compared to the Minotaur's paw. That's what the monster decided to use on the whip of a creature that tightly wrapped around his leg. The old magician looks at what the monster is doing in disbelief. But as soon as the Minotaur touches the sorcerer's limb with a dagger found in the portal, it immediately breaks. And the Minotaur laughs maliciously at the creature that was once a sorcerer. The magician retreats, feeling the threat posed by the dagger in the Minotaur's paws to his new body. And his limb, which was wrapped around the Minotaur's leg, glorifies the grip. The Minotaur looks at the dagger in surprise. The dagger that the Minotaur suddenly pulled out is one of the 5 great treasures of the Miracures family, which the Minotaur obtained along with Alistor's bracelet in a deadly battle with the Heavenly Sword. The Kaldan dagger, and that's exactly what it was, has the blessings of reducing negative effects and resistance to poison. This artifact also gives the owner holy attributes. The sorcerer, full of hatred for the enemy, rushes towards the Minotaur. He tries to attack him, but all attempts are in vain. The Minotaur cuts off the magician's limbs with a dagger. Parts of his limbs and scattered dark energy are flying around the sorcerer. The Minotaur smiles evilly, anticipating his victory. His smile is brimming with malice. He rushes towards the sorcerer with incredible speed, at the same time dodging all enemy attacks and raising his mighty fist to strike the enemy. The sorcerer also rushes towards him, spreading his limbs wide, which only vaguely resemble human hands. The Minotaur lets out a loud roar to give power to its attack on the enemy. The former magician is not far behind him. The Minotaur begins its attack by hitting the thicket of the sorcerer's limbs, but he is being attacked from all sides. Suddenly, he notices something. The monster flies into the wall and then turns to see that the sorcerer is already approaching him from behind. The magician wraps his limbs around him from all sides, leaving him no chance to prevent his fate. The Minotaur, in anger, is trying to get out of mortal captivity, but the creature has no plans to let the monster go. The sorcerer is wrapping him tighter and tighter. The former sorcerer looks at his opponent with a certain amount of contempt and superiority. The tighter he wraps it, the closer he gets to it. The Minotaur lies helplessly on the ground. Even his mouth was wrapped around the limbs of a sorcerer. The monster, corroded by the poison coming out of the sorcerer's lashes, curses his situation and realizes that if everything continues like this, he will not last long. His every movement, even the slightest movement, is difficult for him. In addition, the monster feels unbearable pain from what is happening to his body. His limbs are gradually beginning to decompose. Then the Minotaur tries to think to find a way out of this situation. He says that it's too early for him to die and that he still has a lot to do. Suddenly, an idea comes to his mind, as potion cones come into his field of vision. Suddenly, the monster sees cones that can save his life right now. They are lying very close to him on the stone floor of this, perhaps the last dungeon in his life. The monster remembers that he dropped them during a heavy fight with the sorcerer. The Minotaur is straining, gathering all his will into a fist, trying to move. He manages to move one of his mighty paws, thanks to which he manages to advance and reach the cherished cones, and he eats the cones with potions. Suddenly, an explosion occurs, as a result of which the monster disappears. He attracts the attention of a creature that was once a sorcerer. It looks at the place where the disarmed and exhausted Minotaur used to lie. In its place lie only the broken bones of a creature that was only recently great and powerful. These remain scattered in different directions due to the explosion. The only thing left of the Minotaur is a finger with a bracelet on it. But suddenly, something attracts the attention of the former magician. The finger, which seemed to be just a remnant of the monster, suddenly begins to smoke, and first a full-fledged Minotaur hand grows out of it, and then the entire monster, clenching its fist as a sign of its rebirth. The sorcerer tries to attack the monster again, but the latter directs a dagger in his direction, aiming at the most vulnerable spot of the former sorcerer. The magician tries to avoid the blow, but the dagger continues to approach, thanks to the strength and speed of the Minotaur. The monster gradually begins to recover completely. He glares at the enemy, smiling maliciously, showing his superiority over the enemy, demonstrating his greatness and power. The monster continues to reach with the dagger towards the enemy's weak spot, one of the three eyes which no longer resemble human eyes at all. Something that was once a sorcerer tries to stop the monster with its writhing limbs full of dark and frightening energy heading in its direction. But the Minotaur makes an ominous growl with its huge mouth. The monster rushes at the sorcerer with a howl and pushes him into the ground. All the rage for the inconvenience, pain, and fear of defeat is expressed on the beast's face. He pushes the dagger even deeper into the sorcerer. Hoping to escape, he tries to do something with his limbs from dark energy, but gradually begins to disappear due to the dagger wielded by the Minotaur hitting his vulnerable spot. As a result, the monster stands at a pile of stone fragments, in the depths of which the remnants of the sorcerer's energy were buried. Then only the dagger and the Minotaur remain. The monster collapses. He is breathing heavily, lying on his back. He analyzes the battle and realizes how terrifying the sorcerer was, and that if it weren't for the strength, experience, and items he accumulated, then he, the Minotaur, would no longer exist. In moments of analyzing the battle, the Minotaur's eyes flash back to the most critical moments in which he could have left this world. Suddenly, the place where the clothes of the deceased magician and the remains of his material body and the stones that covered these remains began to glow. Then there's the pile of stuff and rocks behind the Minotaur, too. The monster thinks to himself, looking at one point, that how amazing people are creatures. Despite their tiny size, they are capable of reaching such heights. Inspired, the Minotaur raises its mighty paw, covered with an amazing color resembling the surface of a zebra, to the top. It also begins to glow with a bright light. Next to him lies a dagger that helped him survive this difficult and very difficult battle. He says that then he too can become even stronger, setting himself up as an example of the recently defeated magician. He says he will become more resilient and powerful and reach new heights. He clenches his fist as a sign that he will become much stronger in the future. The entire body of the great Minotaur is illuminated by a bright light. An hour later, the Minotaur climbs the stairs, entering the maze of Sazardon on the first floor. The Minotaur enters a tunnel, at the end of which a light is visible. The monster thinks that perhaps it is behind that radiance that the place the swordsman was aiming for is located. The Minotaur looks attentively at that place and studies it thoughtfully. The light coming from the exit of the maze beckons the great monster. He thinks that maybe there is something there that he has been looking for so long. The light is getting brighter. The monster, not yet seeing what awaits him beyond that white and clear light, hopes that it is there that deadly battles with even more powerful opponents await him. Behind that bright light is a city where kind and hardworking people live. The action takes place in a city where all people lead an absolutely peaceful life. Adults walk around the bazaar looking for the goods they need. Children play various games. Old people relax after living a fairly vibrant life. Various shows take place on the streets, and a mother cradles a child. the action shifts back to the mighty Minotaur. He smiles slyly and moves towards the exit of the tunnel, which beckons him with its bright light, hoping to find new adventures and fights, thanks to which he can become stronger. An unquenchable thirst for power transforms a monster into a perfect being. The Minotaur attentively and resolutely looks at the exit from the tunnel, which attracts him with its bright light. The action takes place in the maze of Sazardon on the ground floor. The monster is heading with incredible speed towards the exit, which, in his opinion, is capable of leading him to new adventures and battles. He hopes that behind this radiance lies what he is looking for. Suddenly, small creatures that look like mice run out to meet him, only with spikes on their small backs. The Minotaur stops when he sees such an active movement below. The majestic beast, after noticing the movement from below, lowers its head down and, to its surprise, sees in front of it a small, fragile child who is holding a sword of the appropriate size in his hands. The boy, dressed in untidy clothes and with disheveled hair, is breathing heavily, holding his sword blade up. The Minotaur looks at the child in disbelief. He wonders what kind of kid he is. The boy's hands, bandaged on the palms with bandages, under which wounds and abrasions are visible, tremble, clutching a small blade. But suddenly, he takes off and rushes towards the Minotaur with great enthusiasm. The monster is perplexed and thinks about why this small, weak, exhausted, and unsuitable person wants to fight him if he can't even leave a scratch. But suddenly, he notices the expression on the boy's face. It expressed only rage and contempt. Suddenly, the Minotaur's face was distorted with surprise and respect towards the boy. The boy plunged the maple tree into the monster's leg with all the strength he had. The Minotaur once again looked at the small sword that had been stabbed into him in incomprehension and surprise, and then at the boy. He, in turn, plunged his sword, breathing heavily, slowly lowering his head with jet-black hair, fainted, losing his last strength right at the feet of the Minotaur. The child looked very tiny and fragile against the background of such a powerful beast as the Minotaur. The boy lay motionless while the Minotaur, full of amazement, stood over him. The small body of the unconscious child lay in front of the great and mighty monster. The Minotaur thought that the boy had lost consciousness. The monster wondered what kind of child it was. He does not understand why the boy did not run away, but decided to attack him, since the weak usually run away and hide. Also, the monster, looking at the sword stuck in his huge hairy leg, does not understand how such a small and weak child could wound his body with such a pathetic weapon and such a slow attack. The Minotaur does not understand how this could happen, but he thinks to himself that this child reminds him of his past self, and that this child had the look of a strong man, the look of a warrior. The monster remembered Percival, the great warrior he had fought, whom he had defeated. Then the Minotaur realizes that this child looks like him from the past. The monster thinks that this boy is now small, weak, and without a normal weapon. But with each fight, he will grow and become stronger just like him. The Minotaur stops talking and gets down on one knee as a sign of respect for the boy. The monster hopes that this boy will one day become a great and formidable opponent for him. That's when he'll have some fun with it. Small and fragile against the background of a huge and mighty Minotaur. The boy lies unconscious. His dark, smooth hair is disheveled, and his long-lashed eyes are closed. At this time, the mighty Minotaur standing over him says that one day, this child will become the same as the adventurers. Then the Minotaur thinks that he will gain strength for now. The bright light continues to beckon the beast, but it only stares intently in his direction, not looking away. His eyes are full of determination to see and understand something new, and to learn new fighting techniques that he will acquire in the subsequent battles that he faces in the future. It's daytime. The sky is blue and clear. The action shifts to the entrance to the maze, which is reached by a high stone staircase. Logan and his companions carefully inspect the entrance to the maze. Laban says they're on the meth, and they've arrived at the Sazardon maze. The company consists of Logan, Laban, a girl who covers her face with a piece of cloth, a guard of young Mr. Julius, and Mr. Julius himself. Logan says it's really him. He then says that they, accompanied by the Rune Master, will explore every floor up to the 6th, and, regardless of whether they find the dagger bracelet or not, They must return to the surface. The room master is a girl with a face covered with a piece of cloth. Laban, rather seriously, frowning and with a degree of concern for his beloved young master, looking at his ward, asks his master Julius to wait on the surface. The boy agrees without saying a word. Then Logan, Laban, and the magician Rune begin to climb the steep stone stairs to the entrance to the maze. The staircase itself is surrounded by crown trees, which are quite dense. Logan, looking at Laban in surprise, says that it is still surprising to him that the head of the house was an adventurer. The man asks the gloomy Laban, who looks at him stealthily, if he has reached a high rank. Laban, climbing the stairs with the others, gloomily says that there was a time when he craved only the strength to repay the house of Mericreus for their mercy. All the time during the conversation, the characters climb the stairs. The man wanted to continue, remembering some details, but then changed his mind. Surprised, Logan tried to ask again, but the man, closing his eyes and remembering unpleasant memories, changed the subject. Suddenly, the girl runemaster attracts their attention. The men turn their gaze towards the gate. A small, exhausted, emaciated boy comes out, wrapped in bandages, holding a sword in one hand and 100 more in the other hand. The characters don't understand what such a small child is doing in such a place. Then they pay attention to his right hand. It contains a round object that looks like a bracelet. They help the boy and give him water to drink. Then young Mr. Julius comes up. Laban addresses the boy, asking what his name is. The boy looks at the man in surprise. Then the disheveled, bandaged, and emaciated child says that his name is Panzel. Logan is surprised that the boy did not show fear of such a huge and powerful man like Laban. Laban asks the guy if he found this bracelet in the maze where the adventurers were going to go down in search of this bracelet and dagger. The boy answers in the affirmative. The man asks the boy to tell him the details. Panzel says he goes to the first floor of the maze to earn copper coins for his sick mom. The boy says that this was the 3rd time he went down to the first floor of the maze. Throughout the story, the child sat with his head down and tightly clutching the bracelet he had received. Logan is surprised that a little boy like Panzel is going to the maze for the 3rd time. The old warrior's face is filled with surprise and respect for such a little boy who went to this scary maze just to earn money for his mom's treatment. Despite the fact that even beginners without special skills can enter the first floor, and sometimes poor people wander in there for a few copper coins, the man is surprised by this, since many become very scared and aggressive, and some even die from the teeth of spiked rats. Logan is surprised that this guy remains focused on one goal, like an experienced adventurer. This fact is also emphasized by the fact that the boy has been going to the maze for the 3rd time, so this whole situation is not an accident at all. The boy continues his story, saying that he killed 2 rats and 2 copper coins fell out of them. He bent down to pick them up, and then looked up and saw him. Laban asks who exactly is his. The boy says that it was a monster that had a huge body covered with fur and a bull's head with large horns. In his memories, Pencil sees a huge animal whose body is completely covered with muscles, and the span of the horns is so large that it reaches the size of the shoulder span. Both men are horrified and shocked, and Logan especially. While the man was recovering from his recent state of shock, Laban asks the boy if he saw a Minotaur. The same person replies that he does not know what his name is. Penzel looks at the man in front of him with incomprehension. Suddenly, Logan tells Laban that he urgently needs to return to the guild, as he has urgent business. The guild leader lowered his head, catching himself thinking about a bad feeling. The old warrior's face was distorted with worry and a certain fear. Laban gives his consent to Logan's departure. The man runs away. Laban turns to the boy again with questions. The boy says he thought that if he didn't resist the monster, it would disappear. So he took out a knife and rushed at the monster. Here, another guard of young Mr. Julius enters the conversation, asking Panzel if he really rushed at the Minotaur. On the face of this young guard guy, one can read the surprise of this little boy and respect for his deed. The boy answers in the affirmative, then adds that because of his height, he could only reach the monster's legs, then apparently exhausted his strength and lost consciousness. All this time, the boy is clutching tightly in his hands the bracelet he found in the maze. Laban, frowning and furrowing his manly eyebrows, asks again, saying whether the boy really lost consciousness. Panzel answers in the affirmative. The guard, who admired the boy's act, is still standing behind the man and listening with interest to the story of the child who met the Minotaur. Then the child says that when he woke up, the monster was gone, and his knife and bracelet were lying nearby. Pansel says he thought the bracelet was expensive and decided to sell it after leaving the maze. Then the room master enters into the conversation between Laban and Pencil. She says it looks like the Minotaur left the bracelet to the boy on purpose, but it remains a mystery to her why the monster did it. Then young Mr. Julius gets out of the carriage. He comes closer and stands next to the room master. Mr. Julius suggests that it could be a reward. Then Pansel enters the conversation with a question about whether the heroes want to take this bracelet from him. He says that since he found the jewelry, it's his. Laban, becoming extremely serious and attaching great importance to his words, says that the boy is right, because according to the rules of the maze, the things found outside belong to the one who found them. He then says that, in truth, this bracelet belongs to young Master Julius's father, as it is a family heirloom of their house. The boy looks at Laban in surprise. Then the man continues very seriously, saying that they would like to buy the bracelet back for a decent price. He asks what the boy thinks about it. Pansel, holding in his hand a bracelet, a family heirloom of the house of young Mr. Julius, turns to young Mr. Julius with a question. If this bracelet really belonged to his father, the boy replies that it's true. Pansel says that in this case he will return the jewelry to the boy without money. The boy holds out his hand with the bracelet, wanting to give it to its rightful owner. Laban and Julius look at the boy in surprise. Laban kneels down to be on the same level with this kind and understanding child. He tries to convince the boy, but he is adamant. Pansel says it would be sad if Julius's father's thing ended up in the hands of an outsider. Laban looks at the boy with surprise and respect. Julius holds out his hand to Tom as a sign of friendship. The young gentleman introduces himself and thanks Pansel. The boy nods in acknowledgement. Laban looks at Pencil in surprise. He doesn't understand why this kid refused the reward in exchange for the bracelet. The man is filled with respect for this child. He then looks closely at the two boys' handshake. Then he wonders where the Minotaur has gone. The action shifts to Logan, who is running through the woods as fast as he can. The man thinks about what could have happened to his friend Gil. He mercilessly curses his friend, who could have lost to the monster, because the monster is still alive. The man remembers all the time he spent with the magician, like the one who almost burned him with a magical fireball, as the two of them fought off the enemies that surrounded them. In the past, Gil was an attractive young man with a cunning personality and long, thick, bright-colored hair. The man runs down the street of the city and remembers their nights around the campfire, snacks together, arm wrestling in bars, then remembers Gil at different points in his life. An inexperienced youth, a strong man, and a gray-haired old man. Logan keeps running. He remembers their first meeting and the beginning of their friendship. The man runs to the guild and enters his office. Logan nervously looks around and remembers his faithful comrade. His gaze falls on the table where lies the Pearl of Ceruria, given to him by Gil. She crumbled into pieces, which meant that his friend had left this world. Logan shouts his friend's name in frustration. The action shifts back to the Minotaur. Being on the first floor of the maze and looking at the blinding light, he thought that the boy who blocked his path seemed to be protecting something behind his back. Looking at the bright light coming from the exit of the maze, the Minotaur thought that since the boy was trying to protect and not let the Minotaur approach him, it means that there is something that needs to be protected, not a battlefield. The monster begins to think deeply about where the battlefields might be. He doesn't understand where he's looking for what he's looking for. The higher he climbed, the weaker the enemies became. So he comes to the conclusion that he needs to act the other way around. The Minotaur looks down at the stairs leading down, at the dark light at the end of the tunnel. The monster comes up with the idea that if you go down lower and lower, then there will surely be a battlefield. The Minotaur realizes that the strong opponents he is looking for are on the lower floors. The action is transferred to the maze of the southern forest in the boss room of the 30th floor. There, the Minotaur is met by a monster with long blonde hair and a huge rage towards all living things. A master comparable in strength to the Minotaur attacks him. The Minotaur smiles and attacks back. The ground danger has passed, but the Minotaur has gone underground and is getting stronger. When you defeat the boss of a certain floor, sometimes special blessing items can drop from it. But starting from the 11th floor, you can get something else when defeating the boss, namely, gifted abilities. These abilities are even rarer than blessing items, and they enhance adventurers in every possible way. Despite its unusual appearance, the Minotaur was no exception. The boss of the 50th floor is the Lizardman. The blessing item that can be obtained upon defeating him is the Bloodstained Scimitar, and the bestowed ability is Warrior Protection. The boss of the 55th floor is the One-Horned Bear. The bestowed ability when defeating him is Dash, a creature similar to a bear but many times superior in his physical strength. When the Minotaur met the adventurers on the 55th floor, he received a 1.5 sword, explosive shells, and various healing potions from them. The Minotaur killed all the people who tried to kill him, the boss of the level 60 Crimson Mantis. When defeating him, the object of the blessing was received, the Sickle of the Mantis, a huge insect using incredible physical strength to defeat the enemy. But it was not enough to defeat the Minotaur. The boss of the 62nd level is the Thousand-Eyed Ghost. The bestowed ability when defeating him is Burning Breath, a huge black substance with a lot of eyes. He was also defeated by the Minotaur. Although sending monsters to the next world did not raise the level of the Minotaur, but he received various combat experiences without regrets and drama. The purpose of this great and powerful beast was to gain new combat experience, not numbers showing the level. The action is transferred to the boss room on the 62nd floor a few dozen minutes after the murder of the Thousand-Eyed Ghost. A man puts on a knight's armor. He says that the information that the Minotaur won't attack unless they attack it themselves turned out to be true. A small squad of knights has emerged from the magic portal and is carefully examining the boss room on the 62nd floor. There are adventurer warriors, a runa master, and a scout. The main knight of the squad is named Selkel Kelganos. Suddenly, a girl speaks to the knight, saying that the Minotaur has what they are looking for, since he is reacting to Kaldan's dagger. The knight, lowering his head and frowning, says that this means that the Minotaur killed his master Percival. He says he can't believe it. The knight is extremely serious when saying such words. Count Kelkanos tells his subordinates Gaius and Zariel to stand back and orders them to ensure the safety of the scout and the room master first. The men disagree with the commander's order. One of them asks if the count is going to stand up to the Minotaur alone. He says it's crazy because a monster at that depth needs at least a level 70. Then the count magically opens a portal and takes out a weapon. He puts up a huge shield in front of the Minotaur. This shield is able to protect the warrior from any attack of the Minotaur. The Minotaur watches the count's actions in shock, as do the knight's subordinates. The count stands behind the shield. Then he lets out a battle cry which surprises the monster. Subordinates are extremely surprised by the count's actions. This battle cry is aimed at supporting allies and intimidating enemies. It is also an ancient rite of the Kelganos clan, which is performed before a deadly battle. The Minotaur turns his gaze on the opponent. Then he lets out a deafening roar. It was the Roar of Madness, a special attack of the Minotaur that lowers the enemy's health, slows him down, and imposes negative status effects. The perfect attack turned out to be many times stronger than the usual one due to the increased level. But Count Kelganos remained motionless. This unwavering and brave warrior withstood the attack of the Minotaur and did not even flinch before receiving the enemy. This surprised the Minotaur a lot. Selkel somehow withstood this crushing attack using only his courage, without resorting to the help of healing potions. The knight stood stubbornly and looked into the face of his opponent. The Minotaur liked such an opponent. The beast rushed towards the count. The knight fixed his gaze on the Minotaur, then slammed his shield into the ground, driving it deeper to withstand the Minotaur's onslaught. As a result, the blow landed right on the shield. But he fell in love with the earth so much that the Minotaur couldn't break through it. Thanks to this sturdy shield, the count withstood the powerful blow of the Minotaur. The monster tried to do it again. The Minotaur began to roar loudly and continuously beat on the shield with its powerful and sturdy paws. The count's subordinates began to gradually recover from the deafening attack of the Minotaur. One of them stands up and wonders that the count could withstand such a powerful monster attack. He wonders what kind of shield it is. His friend explains that this is a Vandes shield. This is a family heirloom of the House of Kelkanos, created by the legendary master gunsmith Aukel Vandes, nicknamed the Great Vandes. This shield is not a blessing item, so it has no special effects. The heads of House Kelganos have been conquering monsters and conquering new lands for generations. This shield is too big, heavy and thick for an ordinary person. But it is truly perfect. Meanwhile, the battle between the Count and the Minotaur continues. The beast continues to deliver powerful blows to the opponent's shield. The Count stands stubbornly, not allowing the enemy to move him from his place. Suddenly, the knight performs a cunning maneuver that gives him an advantage over such a strong enemy as the mighty Minotaur. He substitutes a shield so that the monster's blows do not hit the man, while making room for himself to strike the monster with the sword. When the Minotaur swings for the next blow, the knight swings his sword and hits the monster in the naked side. The Count wounds the monster, which gives him hope that he will be able to defeat the Minotaur. The Count's subordinates rejoice. They are delighted with his cunning. The monster, feeling the blow, bounces to the side and then goes into an uncontrollable rage and is about to strike a new blow at the enemy. But the Count again stands so that the monster's blow falls on the shield, which again withstands it and protects its master. The Count himself is preparing for a new blow with a weapon. When the right moment presents itself, the Count repeats this trick again. This angers the Minotaur, and he grabs the knight by the arm and holds him back. The Count's subordinates are starting to worry about him. They are in a state of shock, as there is a possibility that the Minotaur will defeat their beloved Count. The Minotaur, holding the Count's hand, begins to put pressure on the shield, trying to harm the hand and thus disarm the Count. But the knight is not going to give up so easily. He lets out a battle cry again and gets into a crouch. Then the Count begins to put pressure on the shield. Due to this, he manages to move the monster. As a result, he manages to push the Minotaur away from himself. He lets go of the knight's hand and flies away. Silenus' subordinate is delighted with his strength and asks if he is really only level 57. There's no limit to the knight's surprise. He watches the battle between his Count and the Minotaur with wide-open eyes. His friend explains that the martial art of the House of Kelganos was honed in real battles with proper composure, and its strength cannot be measured by any levels or classes of this maze. The opponents look at each other, preparing for a new attack. The Minotaur raises his sword and aims his horns at the opponent's shield, while the Count keeps his eyes on the monster itself. The man goes behind his shield, preparing for a new attack. The Count says that the Minotaur really looks terrifying. He is far superior to ordinary creatures in terms of physique, physical strength, reaction time, and fighting spirit. He is not inferior in strength to monsters of the 70th level. The Count also says that this cannot be enough. He says that strength is determined not only by physique and muscles, it is also determined by strategy, equipment, and skills. Therefore, humans are comparable in strength to monsters. That was why the Count couldn't believe that his master Percival, the strongest warrior whom he revered as his mentor for life, had been defeated by some kind of monster. The Count wanted to see for himself. The knight suggests that the monster has intelligence. At this moment, the Minotaur rushes towards the Count. He, in turn, is covered with a shield. The knight thinks to himself that this fight will solve everything. The Minotaur continues to press on the shield. Then, suddenly the pressure stops and the knight becomes alert. Suddenly, a bomb flies behind the shield. The Count looks down and sees a surprise from the Minotaur. The bomb explodes, temporarily narrowing the knight's field of vision, filling the entire space around him with thick stone dust. The Count thinks that such an explosive shell will not harm his defenses in any way. But suddenly, something clings to the top of the shield. The Count looks up and sees the limb of the praying mantis. His subordinate shouts that it's a blessing item from the Crimson Mantis, namely, the sickle of the praying mantis. The Minotaur fixes its gaze on the target and then begins to pull the shield towards itself with all its might. The Count begins to pull after the shield, but he tries to hold it with all his might. But gradually his feet begin to slip, and his hands become weaker and weaker to hold the shield. The knight rests his feet on the ground, trying to prevent the Minotaur from taking away his shield. But the monster starts pulling harder and harder. In the end, he snatches the shield from the knight, despite all his attempts to prevent him from taking the shield from himself. Then he tries to hit a defenseless opponent. The Count tries to resist the Minotaur's blow by putting up a block from his hands, which are clad in fairly strong armor. But the Minotaur still hits it, bypassing the block. The Count thinks that the blow landed on the coffin of the Mad King armor created from dragon scales. The blow failed. The Count was already glad that his armor was able to protect him from such a powerful blow from an enraged beast. Suddenly, the Minotaur grabs the man by the shoulder and then takes a deep breath. The Count's subordinates understand that the Minotaur wants to use the War of Madness, and that even the Count cannot withstand such an attack. The Count thinks to himself that he must withstand the onslaught of the monster and deal him a fatal blow. He tries to stealthily bring his weapon closer to the Minotaur in order to strike the last blow in his life. The Minotaur gathers his strength to attack. The Count is expecting her. Then the Minotaur nevertheless directs its attack at the Count. Then the monster releases the man, who, staggering and screaming in pain, slowly moves away from the monster. The Count realizes that scalding breath has been used on him. He doesn't understand how a monster could be capable of such a thing. The Count is trying to rectify the situation. He wonders if this monster is capable of acquiring abilities. His subordinate tries to warn him about the danger, but does not have time. When the Count turns around, the Minotaur hits the Count with his shield. The knight falls to the floor from such a powerful blow and instantly loses consciousness, and the Minotaur lets out a loud roar and begins to beat the Count with a shield. The Count, under a hail of blows, realizes that his master Percival really died from the clutches of this monster. The Minotaur keeps attacking over and over again, and when he raises his shield over the Count again, the Count realizes that the Minotaur is not just a monster. The Count recalls his own words that humans were able to match monsters in strength because of strategy, equipment, and skills. That was the last thought that crossed the Count's mind. At this time, the Minotaur delivers his final crushing blow, chopping off the Count's head with a shield. The knight's subordinates are shocked. One of them wants to avenge the commander, but his friend stops him. He says they're retreating. The man reminds his friend that Mr. Selquill ordered them to ensure the safety of the scout and the rune master first. He says that you need to follow this order and retreat. The Minotaur turns towards the shield. He examines it carefully. He's still standing motionless on top of the former knight's head. The monster continues to stand silently and stare at the shield. The action shifts to the boss room on the 63rd floor. The squad in it receives information that the group that fought on the 62nd floor has retreated, and that it looks like they themselves will soon meet with the Minotaur. They just finished with the floor boss. One of the soldiers clarifies whether the trophies will belong only to their group. Another is worried about how many artifacts the monster collector has accumulated. The girl also says that there are rumors that it is the Minotaur that has the artifacts of the missing gill links. Her companions turn around at her words. Azel Reed says that he is not interested in mining and that he pursues only one goal. He wants to avenge his daughter, who died at the hands of the Minotaur. The magician returns to his memories of his daughter. The girl looks at her father uncomprehendingly. He also says that her top marks in the Magic Academy are nothing. The girl lowers her head, not understanding why her own father does not want to acknowledge her. Then a small staff appears in the magician's memories, and his daughter's voice is heard. The magician returns to the present. The action also takes place on the 63rd floor in the boss room. One of the soldiers says that the trap is ready and that they can act. The young magician says, then they will start with spell preparation. He turns to the girl next to him, whose name is Sarmus, with a request to enhance his spellcasting speed. Then one of the knights asks her to strengthen his protection and constant healing. The girl agrees. Iselreed thinks that the preparation is complete. He only assembled a team of high-level A-rank adventurers. The man clutches the staff tightly in his hand. He says that in that case they will kill him. An adventurer archer runs along the corridor of the maze, simultaneously shooting back at the monster running after him. He runs up to the entrance of the room where the ambush was set up. Running into it, he shouts that their prey is almost there. Suddenly, the Minotaur bursts into the room. He swings at the archer, trying to harm him, but instead he turns out to be a knight who holds back the monster's blow. The knight's legs begin to push through the ground and the sword stubbornly restrain the pressure of the monster's weapon. The man begins to restrain this mighty blow of the Minotaur with all his might. The Minotaur looks at the knight in disbelief. The same one calls Mr. Isel. He is reciting the spell Fetters of Ice Spikes, not far from the combatants. A magic circle appears around the Minotaur, from which long appendages appear, similar to flexible plant stems covered with thorns. The magician stares at his target and continues to maintain and enhance the effect of the spell. His hatred of the monster is so great that strengthening the spell's effect is given to him with ease. since his sense of revenge for his daughter adds strength to the magician. The Minotaur gradually becomes completely entangled in the spiked appendages. He can't move or use a weapon. The adventurer archer explains that they used a pre-prepared magic circle, which allows him to quickly cast demanding high-level spells. He's really impressed. He presents the magician as a master of restraining magic, namely as Isel absolute imprisonment. The magician continues to stare intently at his target, but there is still hatred for this mighty beast in his eyes. Suddenly, Isel calls, Heisel. The girl begins to conjure. She appeals to an impartial judge, asking him to pass sentence on the Minotaur standing in front of her. She asks the scales to tip. A creature summoned by a spell collects powerful weapons from stones. The Minotaur looks on in horror at what is happening. The magician girl shouts at everyone to move away so that they don't get hurt. Everyone runs away very quickly. Isel wishes the Minotaur to leave this world. A huge spinning weapon is slowly approaching the Minotaur. The monster clenches its teeth and begins to try with all its might to break free from these bonds. He manages to free his hand. At this moment, the weapon created by the spell falls on him with incredible force. Everyone in the room covers their faces with their hands from the dust created by the collision of the most powerful weapon and the Minotaur. The girl magician says that everything worked out because there was a direct hit. Isel covers her face with her hand, remembering her daughter. He thinks to himself that he did not deny her power. The man thinks that he only wanted the girl to live happily in a calm and far from the battles of the world. The man thinks that he has avenged his daughter, Charlia. The dust gradually begins to settle. The knight tells the magician that now his daughter will be able to calm down. The adventurer archer is thinking about the treasures that await them. The dust continues to settle, and as it descends, the Minotaur appears before the heroes, shielded from powerful weapons by the shield of the defeated count. The monster peeks out from behind the shield, casting a contemptuous glance at the adventurers. All the characters are terrified. They don't understand how this could happen. The mage girl says that even a Hydra would have died in such a blow. She doesn't understand and doesn't know what kind of shield it is. The Minotaur exhales, then opens a magic circle portal and takes out bombs from it. He throws them towards the adventurers and they explode, disorienting people. One hits Iseli. The knight tries to call the magician. But at that moment, the Minotaur pulls a shield out of the ground and frees his legs to move towards the adventurers. The Minotaur, growling threateningly, strikes at the adventurer, but they manage to disperse in different directions. The archer tries to attack the monster, but it hides behind a shield. Then the monster notices the knight attacking him from behind. He tries to knock him down, but the man dodges and makes a second attempt to attack the Minotaur. But the monster manages to react. He throws his shield at the knight. From such a blow, the man flies into the wall. Then the Minotaur grabs the shield again and throws it towards the archer. He manages to dodge and jump away so that the shield just crashes into the ground near him. Then the Minotaur decides to attack himself. He swings at the archer with a massive sword. The adventurer screams in terror. The Minotaur begins to lower his sword. A man creates an illusion. The Minotaur strikes at the unfortunate. The remaining adventurers are trying to do something to repeat the spell to destroy the Minotaur. The monster notices them and heads in their direction. But the magician at the right moment triggers the Firmament of Heaven spell, which forms a dome over the magicians, which prevents the Minotaur from striking. Rage can be seen in the Minotaur's eyes. He starts hitting the dome non-stop. The magician tells the monster that it is useless, because the firmament blocks all physical attacks. He says you just have to wait for Heisel to cast the spell. Then the Minotaur decides to use his roar. The sound wave completely covers the adventurer dome. The monster increases its attack. The adventurers inside turned into charred bodies. The dome is gradually collapsing. The Minotaur stands and looks at its remains. Then he hears the sound of a potion bottle falling and turns around. He sees the magician steaming away. The monster looks indifferently in the direction of the man. He can barely find the strength to get up on all fours. Isel clenches her fists in her own helplessness. He glares angrily at the Minotaur and then runs out of the room. The Minotaur just stares after him. The monster thinks to himself that he has won. The Minotaur thinks that one powerful blow of incredible destructive power and a carefully thought-out trap could surely have sent him to the next world. But he won. The monster thinks that thanks to the shield board, he was able to win. He's thinking that he's got a pretty interesting trophy. Suddenly, the Minotaur hears a voice behind him. He turns around and sees how the adventurer Archer, whom he just recently cut down, has survived and is trying to take the shield away. The adventurer is already opening a magic circle portal to remove the shield into it, when suddenly, the Minotaur realizes why this man is still alive. The Minotaur's face expresses intense anger. He rushes towards the adventurer. He tries to do something, but this time he doesn't have time. The Minotaur punches him with all his might. All that's left of the man is a wet spot. The monster exhales, realizing that it's over. He picks up and examines the shield. The Minotaur thinks to himself that he doesn't understand what it was just now. He thinks that when he saw the man who tried to steal the board, he was overcome with anger and an unfamiliar feeling. The monster looks at the shield and suddenly it dawns on him that this unfamiliar feeling was a feeling of fear. He was afraid that this board would be taken away from him. The Minotaur stood in thought for a few minutes and then clenched his teeth in anger. He threw the shield to the ground with incredible force. The monster began to growl, very furiously, realizing what an idiot he was. The Minotaur hits the shield with all his might with his sword. He thinks that the sword makes him stronger, and the better he wields it, the greater his power becomes. But as for the shield, the Minotaur doesn't understand if it makes him stronger. He thinks that during the fight he hides behind her, afraid of losing her. He wonders if this is the kind of power he craves. The Minotaur hits the shield again with all his might. The mantis limb that he hit him with this time shatters into splinters. The monster picks up a sword and thinks that it does not crave this power. The Minotaur thinks that he is only pretending to be strong, hiding behind this board, and that this is not the power he is looking for. The Minotaur strives to withstand any attack and smash this board with one blow, relying only on his own strength. The Minotaur hits the shield with all his might, but it doesn't budge. The monster clenches its teeth and scowls. He thinks that he needs to go lower, to the lowest floors. He's going to find even stronger opponents and even more deadly battles. The Minotaur leaves the shield driven into the ground of the room and leaves. The action is postponed for several months ahead. The staircase down which the Minotaur descended is strewn with the bodies of monsters he defeated. The 100th floor, in the boss's room, on the lowest level. The Minotaur stands on the damaged enemy, letting out a victorious roar. Then the action shifts to the magnificent kingdom of Valdemost, namely to its very beautiful and majestic capital, Ludfar, the mansion of the Mercurius family. Two boys are learning the art of sword fighting. They swing their swords as an exercise. They are being watched by their mentor. These boys are young Mr. Julius and the Panzel boy found at the entrance to the maze. Logan is watching their training closely. Laban trains young warriors by making them do this exercise. Now he tells his students that the training is over for today and they can rest. The training session is over. Logan tells Laban that Panzel is making progress. To this he replies that the boy has a good memory and it helps him a lot. He also says that, it seems, thanks to this child, Mr. Julius is easier to bear the loss of his father. Labong says that Panzel has good fencing skills and an impeccable character, so the man wants to raise this child so that in the future, he will become a key figure among the vassals supporting Mr. Julius. Logan is surprised at how much Laban appreciates Panzel. The man replies that he feels as if the meeting with Panzel was predetermined by Mr. Percival. Logan then says that as for the reason for Mr. Percival's passing, it was accepted according to their statement. Laban says that in the near future, it will be publicly announced that he will leave this world from the disease. Logan says that in this case, there will be no other obstacles from the noble houses and the inheritance of the title. By Mr. Julius will be without problems. But there are rumors about the real reason for the master's departure. But now it will bring problems to the house. Laban then turns to Logan with a question about how he himself is hesitating about issuing a request to destroy the Minotaur. Logan recalls the royal order to issue a request for the destruction of the Minotaur, which is associated with the passing of the great hero of the state, Gil Lynx, on behalf of the guild, without mentioning the king. Laban says that Master Gil is simply in a place where the waves of vital energy do not reach for some reason, and he understands Logan's reluctance to issue a request that confirms the passing of the teacher, although he prefers to think otherwise. Logan says it's not about his feelings for his old friend, but about the reward. Laban asks the other man again not understanding what he is talking about. Logan says the reward is too big. Even though it's said to be related to Gil, it's too much to reward for destroying one monster. Logan says that destroying the Minotaur will probably clarify Gil's fate, and he agrees with that. But, in his opinion, this request must have some other purpose. And it seems to him that the king uses Gil for this. Laban, thinking about Logan's words, looks attentively at the man. It's obvious from his face that he knows something. Then he turns to the man with a request that he perceive everything he hears from him is a fairy tale. Logan looks at the other man in incomprehension. Laban says that during the time of the previous king of a kingdom, the second queen, immediately after the birth of her daughter, fell out of favor with the king and was sent to prison. Since then, both mother and daughter have been under lock and key. In fact, it was the king's plan so that the mother and daughter could live in peace without participating in political intrigues. The crown prince, the son of the first queen and the current king, inherited his father's wish and pretended to dislike his stepsister. In fact, he felt deep affection for her, as if she were his own sister. Logan wanted to ask something, but Laban interrupted him and continued his story. He says that one day his beloved stepsister, thanks to a wonderful meeting, fell in love. Upon learning about his sister's lover, the king was very surprised, because this man turned out to be the young head of a noble family, whom the king himself trusted infinitely for his valor and honesty. Logan looked at Laban in surprise. The man continued his story. That young man knelt before the king and asked for approval for their marriage to his beloved, without even knowing about her origin. The king was happy. In order not to reveal his true feelings, the king did not officially exclude his sister from the royal family, but used the surname of distant maternal relatives to marry her off. Even the birth of a son didn't change anything. So the king secretly protected the happiness of his beloved sister. It became the meaning of his life. Therefore, the news of the death of his sister's husband came as a real shock to the king. The stunned king probably secretly investigated and found out that a certain monster had caused the young head of the house to disappear from this world. The girl felt very deep sadness and longing for her beloved. The king's once happy sister became a widow, and the sweet nephew, whom the king purposely avoided, was left without a father. The king, following his sister, sank into despondency. For him, this monster has become a sworn enemy. But the king could not act for the sake of revenge for one noble, especially since the family had declared death from illness. Therefore, he decided to assign the adventurers to destroy this monster under the pretext of searching for an important hero. Here Logan realizes that the high award was not related to palace or political goals, but reflected only the magnitude of the king's love and anger. The man gets into the king's story. Logan turns to Laban with a question. He asks him what he thinks this Minotaur is and why this creature appeared so suddenly. Laban frowns into the distance and then begins to speak. His reasoning is that sometimes things happen in this world that they cannot understand or explain. It is quite possible that there is some important meaning in this, but even being in the very center of events, they are not able to understand it. He says that's why, in any case, they have only one way to go, and that is to do their best. Logan says the man is absolutely right. Suddenly, Logan, who is talking to his interlocutor, is called by young Mr. Julius. The man turns to the boy's voice and asks what happened to him. Young Mr. Julius says he has a question for the man. Logan asks what the question is. Young Master Julius, with a twinkle in his eyes, asks the old adventurer how the weapon called the warhammer, wielded by Mr. Logan, differs from the sword. Penzel stands behind the young gentleman, with her eyes full of interest. Laban and Logan look at the guys in surprise. There's genuine confusion on their faces as to why the guys might be interested in the difference between an ordinary sword and Logan's weapon. The old warrior repeats the essence of Mr. Julius's question. Laban, frowning and smiling joyfully to some extent, says that only strong and sturdy warriors can wield a warhammer because of its weight. He says that unlike a sword, this type of weapon does not require technology, but it has an amazing destructive power that makes up for it with a vengeance. Logan starts chuckling. He squats down to be on the same level with young Mr. Julius and Penzel. Continuing to laugh, he says, turning to Laban, who is standing behind him, asking if he really thinks that absolutely no techniques are required to wield his weapon. Then the old warrior turns around and offers Laban, who insulted him, to have a small duel. The man promises to show the warrior who offended him the technique of a warhammer. The old man's face is distorted by a malevolent smile with tightly clenched teeth. Laban was taken aback by his friend's suggestion. Confusion can be seen on his face. He did not want to offend or hurt his comrade in arms in any way. The man tries to justify himself, but he is interrupted by the enthusiastic voice of young Mr. Julius. The boy's eyes are shining with happiness because he is going to see a duel between two great, by his standards, warriors. Logan runs up to Laban and punches him lightly in the chest with his fist, saying that since young Mr. Julius said so, it means that they can't do anything about it, so they need to fulfill young Mr. Julius's wish in the best possible way. Laban is still at a loss. Then the man lowers his head and furrows his thick eyebrows, and then agrees to the proposal of the old warrior regarding a demonstration duel. Then he looks up from the floor and smiles with the excitement of a youngster. The man says that, to tell the truth, he also wanted to fight Logan one day. Laban turns towards the surprised pencil, telling the perplexed but joyful boy to also watch the duel that Laban and Logan want to arrange. The man says it will be a good lesson for the boy. Enza looks with surprise and joy at the mentor who sheltered and trained him. His eyes glow with excitement, just like Laban's own. The action is moved forward a few days to the building of the guild of which Logan is the head. A huge crowd of adventurers of different ages and genders gathered at a huge and large-scale bulletin board. There are various information sheets about buildings on this board. The crowd of adventurers is buzzing loudly. Everyone was attracted by only one ad out of all the others, namely an ad with information about a task dedicated to the capture and destruction of a mysterious beast called the Minotaur, which somehow annoyed high-ranking people so much that a huge price was put forward for his head. All the adventurers gathered, reading this announcement about the capture and destruction of the Minotaur, smile maliciously and triumphantly, hoping to take the reward for themselves. They all think that this task will be very easy, unaware of how scary the Minotaur is. The action is transferred to the dungeons, the labyrinth, where the battles of boss monsters and the great and terrible Minotaur take place. Axes, swords. Morgensterns fall to the stone floor from the lifeless bodies of monsters, the owners of the floors, who were defeated by the great Minotaur. This monster stands in the middle of a field line with weapons left behind by monsters, who, as it seemed, could become worthy opponents for the Minotaur. Then the great and mighty Minotaur finds the sword he got from one of the monsters he defeated. He lifts it high up and makes a powerful swing. Then he carefully looks with his sharp eyes at the weapon he received. The monster closes its eyes to feel all the emotions when dancing with such a magnificent blade, to feel its smoothness when cutting through the air surrounding such a great and powerful creature as the Minotaur. The monster starts dancing with the blade, making indescribable movements. During his battle dance, the Minotaur thinks that he has descended to the lowest level, but could not satisfy his hunger in battles. At the moment of this thought, the Minotaur's face was distorted with genuine irritation. The monster's next thought was that monsters alone were not enough for him. He doesn't know what can stop this hunger in such a case. An expression of reasoning and thoughtfulness appeared on his face, furrowed brows and a sad look. Then the monster, still continuing to spin in a sword dance, remembers the people who gave him some of the most beautiful fights in his life. He remembers the adventurer knight Percival, who was the father of young Master Julius and to whom the Minotaur compared Little Pencil. The monster also remembers Gil, who practically dissolved it and practically did not leave a wet place from it. At the moment of these memories, the Minotaur comes to the idea that among people like them there is his worthy rival. Suddenly, some kind of not very attractive-looking, bubbling liquid begins to seep out from under one stone slab, making gurgling sounds. The majestic and mighty beast turns around, hearing something unpleasant. Maze monsters are not born from their mother's womb. They come out of the walls and floor like water from a spring. Something seeping out from under the numerous slabs gradually grew in size and began to take on a certain shape. After the existing form dies, a monster of the same type appears on the same level after a while. The Minotaur looks at the forming something in some confusion, preparing to attack. The process of monsters appearing on the floors is cyclical. The new monster also continues to transform. The Minotaur is on alert with his blade thrust forward, as the newly appeared monster can attack at any moment. The Minotaur, looking at the appearance of a new opponent, thinks that if he waits at the lowest level, then only the strongest will come to him, and the one he is looking for, in his opinion, will surely be among them. The monster is very serious. His frown and stern look clearly indicate this. The great and mighty Minotaur thinks that he must definitely become even stronger, that he needs to hone his skills, learn how to fight and become stronger and stronger. At the moment of these grandiose thoughts of the Minotaur, the monster that appeared right in front of his eyes began to acquire clearer lines of his future appearance. The Minotaur smiles maliciously and triumphantly, looks at the emerging new opponent. Baring his teeth, thinks that he needs to get stronger and stronger so that when the time comes, he can enjoy the moment to the fullest. The newly appeared creature had 3 heads, was covered with scales, and resembled a huge dragon in size, which the brave, powerful, and seeking new deadly battles that could make him stronger than the Minotaur had to fight. The maze, so intricate and mysterious, its walls illuminated only by torches, seemed to recognize the Minotaur as its new master.